Everybody, and welcome to this afternoon's meeting of the Greater Cambridge Partnership Joint Assembly. Can you hear me at the back? No. Can you hear me at the back? Yes. Oh, I don't want to do that for long. Right. I'd like to open the meeting and welcome you all here. I want a particular welcome to those new members of the Joint Assembly, Councillors Nikki Massey, Ian Sollum, Peter Topping and Eileen Wilson. Welcome also to Joe Sainsbury from IMET and Heather Richards from Transversal, although I'm not sure if they're in the room at the moment, but anyway, when they are, they're welcome. I hope you'll all enjoy your term serving on the Joint Assembly. Councillor Bates is due to join us at some point, so again a welcome to him. So my first job here is election of chair for the Assembly. Can I ask for nominations please for chair of the Joint Assembly? Councillor Bick.
I'd like to nominate Councillor Wotherspoon.
Thank you very much. We've nominated Councillor Wotherspoon. Have we got someone from Committee Services that can come and sort out? Because they should be hearing through the speakers in there. So we have had a nomination for Councillor Wotherspoon. Have I a seconder, please?
I'm happy to second that.
Yeah, we've had two seconders, so we're well covered there. Are there any further nominations? No? Right, at that point then, thank you, and I declare that Councillor Tim Wotherspoon to be the new chair of the Joint Assembly. Before I vacate the chair and hand over, can I just say a few words of thanks here to those that were here during the last year, those members that is, that were here during the last year for their forbearance during that time. Thanks to Councillor Wotherspoon for his support as Vice Chair, especially for his forensic summing up of discussions. To the officers that I've worked closely with in carrying out my role as Chair, I have been grateful for their help, advice and guidance. And to the many members of the public, so this is a bit I'm hoping you hear, who have asked questions at these meetings, and in that time, thank you for your engagement. I will now move over.
Right then, members, thank you very much for that honour. I hope I live up to expectations, or if your expectations are bad, I hope I defy them. I'd like to share what Councillor Price said about the service that all members have provided over the past year, and I've certainly enjoyed working with him very much during those 12 months. He's been a solid anchor through stormy seas. And to the extent that seas may be even more stormy ahead, I hope that I am as solid an anchor as he was. Which brings us to the election of the Vice Chairperson. Do I have any nominations, please? Councillor Topping.
So, although it seems slightly unfair on those of us who aren't called Tim, I should like to nominate Councillor Tim Bick as the Vice Chair.
Thank you very much. Councillor Tim Bick has been nominated. Do we have a seconder for Councillor Bick? Councillor Sollum. Yes. Do we have any further nominations for the post of Vice Chairperson? In that case, I'm delighted to announce that Councillor Bick has been appointed Vice Chairman for the coming municipal year, and I'll invite him to join me at the table. Councillor Price welcomed all the new members to the Assembly, and I'd just like to pass a short reference to those we've lost.
Excuse me, Chair, speakers aren't working in this room. We're struggling to hear you.
We know. We're trying to get that fixed.
I'm so sorry. Yes, well, I'm just waffling at the moment. So, in the hope that we get the speakers fixed by the time we come to the real business, that'll be great.
So I'm going to have to get somebody who actually can have a look. I just thought maybe.
Okay. I was just thanking the outgoing council members in particular. They're Councillor Bridget Smith, Councillor John Williams, Councillor Grenville Chamberlain, Councillor Kevin Cuffley and Councillor Dave Bagent. And I'd just like to share with you that Councillor Cuffley is not terribly well, and I'm sure all of us would join with me in passing on our best wishes for his recovery.
Agreed.
So I'll try to speak as loudly as I can, but it's going to be a bit ungainly for the members in this half of the room. One of the things I ought to say, therefore, to members who are in this part of the room is that those two little black boxes on the tables in front of you are very sensitive microphones, and they're capable of picking up whispers. So just be careful if you want to say something discreetly to your neighbour, that you're very discreet about it. Are there any apologies for absence, please?
Chairman, we haven't received any apologies.
Thank you. Can I have declarations of interest? And can I just remind members of the Joint Assembly then to declare interest either at the start of the meeting, or if they forget at the start of the meeting, if something comes up during an agenda item that they suddenly realise they ought to have declared an interest, could they declare that interest straight away? I'm so sorry, I thought that Councillor Williams had ceased to be a member, but since he has now turned up, I'll withdraw my thanks to him for his past service, and I welcome him for his continuing service. I'm so sorry, John, my apologies. It's because you hadn't turned up that I thought, I was wondering what might have happened to you. Anyway, right, no, you're a great member, and I look forward to sparring with you, and indeed sharing our joint interest in getting a decent public transport system for Cambridge and South Cambridge off the cards. Thank you. Okay, so that takes us to the minutes of the previous meeting. We have a bit of a doorstop of an agenda, I'm afraid, but we'll get through it as quickly as possible, I hope. So taking the minutes page by page, are there any items on the first page, page 3, 4, 5?
Page 5.
Yes.
Which carried page 5. On the bottom right-hand side of that page, local transport plan, it picks up the report noted 200,000 additional jobs. I think actually it was 20,000.
Well, we're very ambitious, I think.
Well, we like the ambition.
Yes, we like ambition. I think that may be in a longer time frame, but yes, thank you very much for pointing out that typo. Page 6. Page 7. Page 8. Page 9. 10. 11. 12. And I think page 13 is the last one. In that case, I'm taking it, members, that you accept these as a correct record of the previous meeting's discussion. Thank you very much. Right, that takes us into questions from members of the public. We had 10 questions submitted, but following a custom practice, we're taking 9 of those questions because one of them doesn't relate to an item on the agenda today. That question was about Histon Road. The questioner has been informed and thank you very much for putting the time into for putting that question, and we'll make sure that a suitable response is sent by email. I'm going to invite the questioners to ask their questions at the start of each item as we go through the agenda. So these are items 8 on the transport strategy, 10 on Milton Road and 12 on Greenways. Copies of all the questions submitted are available, and members, you should have them in front of you. That takes us to item 7, which is petitions. We will not be hearing a petition today, although we have received one. It falls between the 50 and 500 signatures threshold, which means that I have to notify the Assembly that we've received that petition, but we don't have to consider it formally today. The petition requests implementation of a 20-mile-an-hour speed limit for the lower part of Histon Road and a nighttime HGV traffic control order. That petition has already also been submitted to Cambridgeshire County Council, the City Council and Daniel Zeitler MP, and I'd like to thank the residents of Histon Road for presenting that submission. I'm going to move on now to the bulk of the agenda, so we start off with item 8. Which is the Greater Cambridge Partnership Transport Strategy. We have one public question on this item, and I know Edward Lee is here, so if I could invite him to come up to the table. And he's a well-rehearsed practitioner at this, so he knows the drill. And Mr. Lee, the court is yours.
Thank you, Chairman. I come to you with the knowledge that we now have a delay, or pause to the busway schemes. And I urge you to take this as an opportunity, as a positive opportunity, to really rethink the 10-year strategy. The reasons that the Mayor has required the delay are, I believe, partly justified in that we need a longer-term strategy, a long-term vision that's coherent for the whole region. But there is plenty that can be done in the shorter term. And I urge you to be a lot more ambitious with the cycling and walking policy, because there is a huge potential in connecting up not just villages with the city and employment sites in the city, but linking villages up to each other, linking villages to their local schools and to other local amenities. Because this all generates traffic. The vast majority of the traffic on the roads is for short trips. And a lot of that could be shifted to cycling if there were safe, convenient infrastructure. So I urge you to really raise the bar, the ambition for the cycling and walking side of things. But I also want you to focus on much more about what's wrong with the bus services. The bus lanes from the Histon and Milton Road, even the officers would acknowledge, is it really going to provide marginal benefit? The real benefit on those two roads is the cycling infrastructure. A short section of bus lane really provides a tiny benefit for a small part of the day. And it won't generate huge modal shift, which is what we really need. And I think I'm right in saying that really on this, the officers are looking to you for leadership, for visionary leadership, to ask them to seek more ambitious ways of achieving this modal shift. And that does mean more restraints in the city centre. It does mean looking at possible ways to raise money to pay for a much expanded public transport network. And it does mean looking at how to work with the operators, Stagecoach, Whippet, and any others that want to take part, in how to build a coherent, integrated network that allows people to commute, get to the shops, get to the vet, get to the doctor's surgery, and not require a car. Because at the moment, for most people in the city and outside the city, most trips require a car. There is not a viable public transport alternative. And it's not just the speed, it is the integration, it's the ticketing, and it's the routing. And I've just listed here just some of the things that can be done in a relatively short term. You know, it's about enforcement, it's about better ticketing, it's about looking at how to interchange between services. And I'm not going to read through it all, you can see that. But I just leave you with one thought, which is that we absolutely need to get a proper integration of thought and input into every project. It needs the landscape strategy, it needs an urban design strategy, and it needs people who understand user experience of using a ticket machine, user experience of using buses and switching between different modes of transport. And to include that thinking right from the outset and right through and have constant communication right through each project. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You didn't overrun very much either, so I'm very grateful to for that. In introducing the report, I think Mr. Blake is going to address some of the points that you may have asked there. So thank you.
Hit the right button. So it's a good start. So I just want to sort of briefly introduce the report because I know members will want to get into the conversation. Can you hear me at the back? If I could go over the...
I'm very sorry, members. I'm informed that the amplifier has died, perhaps keeled over in the hot weather. So we will do our best to speak up for you. I'm very sorry.
Yes, you're very good. We can hear you too. If they take it out, you'll that'd be great.
Follow me.
Okay, I'll follow the chair's lead. So just in terms of the report, what it's trying to do is to bring further shape and definition to some of the issues that Edward's raised, but in terms of what the transport strategy and objectives are of the partnership's work going forward. What it is particularly trying to do, and bear in mind this is work in progress, is to say, let us understand in detail what the current and future public transport requirements are for the area, and then let's move into scheme service definition once we've got surety around that. It particularly draw attention, there's two graphs in the paper, and I think if we just focus on that. So paragraph 5.4, and then it goes over the page to paragraph 5.5. Paragraph 5.4 are the growth in traffic projections across the area that are essentially saying, all things being equal, with the planned growth that we've got, and if the modal share stays the same, we're going to get 26,000 more vehicles on our network over the coming period, with all the pressure that will inherently create. And what we need to do is to deliver an attractive, viable public transport network that means it is the travel mode of choice. The second graph just tries to demonstrate what that would mean in terms of patronage numbers. So this isn't a business as usual discussion. This is very much moving from 13 or 14,000 regular passengers to maybe mid-30,000s regular passengers. And what we've got to do is to ensure that we are providing the services and the infrastructure that's required to encourage people to do that. The final point of note is just that we do quite a bit of work, and the work will continue, on what things will encourage people to get out of their car and to move on to public transport. And what it is clearly saying here is that travel time is the determining factor. Travel time and journey reliability are what people want. They want the options to be able to cross the Greater Cambridge area, but they want the certainty that they're going to arrive on time to meet their sort of work, education or other requirements. I'll hold it there, Chairman.
Right then, I'm sure members, all of us agree that the goal of a comprehensive integrated public transport system is one to which we aspire and which we would like. Sorry, John is smiling at me because he knows how passionate I am about this. So I'll shut up at that point and invite other members of the Assembly to join in the discussion. So. Oh, John wants to do it.
Yeah, I'll start.
Right then, thank you.
Apologies for being late.
You use your mic, John.
I hope you can hear me at the back. I'll speak as loud as I can. I think what this report shows that in the short term, and given that we have a crisis now, and a crisis that is going to grow exponentially in the next couple of years, before we can think about mass transit. And the crisis is that we need to get people out of their cars and onto public transport. And that public transport, in the short term, is the bus. We have no alternative here. You know, we have some limited local rail services from places like Waterbeach down into Cambridge and places from Foxton and that sort of thing. But principally, the main public transport infrastructure in this city and in its surrounding area is the bus. And one of the difficulties we have is that the buses are deregulated. And even with the Buses Act, unless the Mayor chooses to go down the road of franchising, and even if we did that, that is years away, because we know that Stagecoach will challenge that in the courts, and we know that you need quite a sizable admin behind it to have a proper developed bus network based on franchising. For the next couple of years, we have got to live with buses that are deregulated. And we have to find some way or other of working with Stagecoach and Whippet and any other bus operator to try and achieve what we want to do here in this report. And one of the things I find is that is a bit light in this report on how we're going to achieve that, how we're going to achieve the integration that we want with a deregulated bus network. So that's my overall view of this report. And the second thing I want to talk about is it does highlight that even if you live in the city and on the immediate fringes of the city, like Cherry Hinton and Fulbourn, journey times by public transport are appalling. It is better to get in your car and drive from Cherry Hinton into the city centre than it is to wait for the City 3 bus. A distance of what, 2.5 miles at most? I mean, that is appalling. That is something that we should be utterly ashamed about. And I hope that before we wait until we get demand management charging come in, that given the fact that we have already set a precedent and we are subsidising the park and rides, that we would be prepared to subsidise enhanced bus service from those areas that have already got poor journey times, so that we can start to make that shift from car to public transport. Because if we continue to wait and wait until we have physical infrastructure and demand management charging, I'm afraid things are just going to get worse and worse, and our existing bus services are going to get worse and worse because of the increase in traffic congestion and the problems that we have, as I say, having to work with a deregulated bus network.
Thank you very much. I seen there was a report in the Times a couple of days ago on a recent survey. A report in the Times a couple of days ago on a recent survey which suggested that private cars were in general half an hour faster for commuting than public transport, even in London. And I thought that was a very depressing statistic, and it's obviously one of the things that we need to factor into our activities going forward. I'm going to invite Mr. Blake to reply to some of those points, but I'll hear other members of the Assembly first. So, Noel. Councillor Gallagher.
Right, thanks. Something very specific, but on page 17, there's a reference there to the very successful guided busway, and there's a reference there under 3.4 that there's an intention to have trials of autonomous vehicles on the busway between the station and Trumpington, which I think it seems to be a good thing to be moving towards. But what concerns me is that currently that route is, from my observations after a visit to the Cambridge assessment site recently, the route is actually getting more and more dangerous because of the success of the number of people cycling and walking alongside the busway. There are no barriers and there's no fencing there. And there is a huge amount of congregation around the entrance to Cambridge Assessment currently. And I'm very fearful of the fact that there could be an accident because of the buses going by at varying speeds. I mean, there is a speed limit, but even with that, there is the danger of pedestrians and cyclists falling into the path of a bus. And what I would like to see done, and I have actually had correspondence with the executive of the county council, the executive director of the economy and environment, and I have been given assurances that there will be another safety audit undertaken. But my fear is that an answer to the queries about safety could be something like that. We can't afford to put fencing up. So I'm asking here if the CGP could put aside funds for making the stretch from the central railway station down to the Trumpington Park and Ride safer, because as we know, Royal Papworth is going to be opening soon. The biomedical campus is now burgeoning, more and more staff going there. So that route is going to get more and more busy with pedestrians and cyclists. So yes, it's good to have autonomous trials, but I think we need to look at the safety along that route beforehand.
I mean, obviously we're caught by our own success in many ways, because the cycle track along the busway has been hugely successful. But I thought its initial purpose was as an emergency service track, so I'm not sure how fencing works with that. But I think that's something that we'll take away. And as you say, you've already raised it with the Executive Director of Economy, Transport and Environment. I'm going to come to Peter in a minute, but first of all I've got Councillor Price.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just following on really from Councillor Williams' points, none of which I say I would disagree with. I think every other aspect of pressure groups, if you like the Cambridge Cycling Campaign, who have been really, really effective, it's long been felt, and I've long felt, and I've said so in this place and others, about bus users, and nobody gets to hear about bus users and their issues and how they feel. And there has recently been formed a bus user group for sort of Cambridge and surrounding area, and I'm hoping that group can be as successful as the Cambridge Cycling Campaign, that they can join in with telling us, their experiences of the bus service in this city, which is not great. We also have the issue of the Mayor of the Combined Authority, who is not in favour of buses, and somehow he has to be persuaded that there is somewhere for buses, and they have to form a part of everything that happens in the Greater Cambridge area. He said throughout his election campaign how people didn't use buses. I think what he meant was he doesn't use buses, therefore, because he clearly thinks nobody else does. So I look forward to some input into this, hopefully from the bus user group, so that there is actually other pressures on us.
Thank you very much, and I certainly welcome the formation of that bus users group as well. And Councillor Topping.
Thank you, Chair. So, like Kevin, I was at the bus user group inaugural meeting a couple of Saturdays ago. Well, I'm sorry, but I wasn't trained as an opera singer, so what do you want me to do? I mean, I can't project to the back of the room without standing up, and I'm not going to do that.
We've got music coming from outside as well.
Are the windows open? Which should we prefer? I'll do my best to summarise what Councillor Topping says. Yes. Okay. There we are. That's a very helpful suggestion. Thank you very much.
So my point is that I think that in the short term, making more effective use of buses is probably essential. But one of the things that I would expect us to do is to look further into the future, and not just on the concept of autonomous vehicles, but on the concept of mobility as a service, which is, as I'm sure most people know, is about making use of IT systems that can, in a sense, turn the bus route into the best way of collecting the most people on a particular journey, and using both private and public sector funded bus services. And in particular, down in the south of South Cambridgeshire, where we have some very large science hubs who are currently spending nearly £1 million a year on providing travel simply from a rail station 2 or 3 miles to the science hub. And I know that those companies would very much like to work with the bus companies and ourselves in trying to develop this mobility as a service concept that would enable the public to make better use of the bus services that they're running for their staff. And it seems to me that those are the sorts of things that we ought to be having an aspiration to develop, as well as recognising that bus use in the short term is probably a very important part of our strategy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Topping welcomed the setting up of the bus users group, but he said we ought to be looking a bit further forward than just things like autonomous vehicles running on the busway, and looking to explore how we can work, particularly with our southeast science parks, in developing mobility as a service to make best use of public and private vehicles along any particular route. So he urged us to work closely with private sector partners in elaborating that idea. Thank you, Councillor Topping. Mr. Wilkinshaw.
Thank you. I'd like to pick up on Mr. Lee's comments about ambition. This is really important. As a point I've made before, this is about a very large number of people who need to access our city, and it will increase hugely over the coming 10 years or so. So I welcome the report, and I think there's a lot of good stuff in here. One thing that is missing is the reference to, we talk about an integrated plan. It doesn't recognise that cars are also part of that, especially outside the city centre, and the opportunity to interchange between the car and other forms of transport, which becomes really important. So we need to be able to access it. I don't think there's enough of that picked up in this report, but otherwise a great report. I understand the numbers.
Right then, a very valuable point. Councillor Bick.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to welcome this report. I mean, the report is asking us to comment on progress, and so I can divide that into 2 parts. I think it's been too slow up till now to get to this point, but I think if we follow this direction, then we're following the right direction. The thing that I think that this marks is a welcome departure from believing that the transport challenge is all about infrastructure schemes and capital projects, and not much about services. And services, in the end, are what people get. And I think that clearly our eventual solution is going to be a blend of both of those things, but we have underplayed the role of services in where we're needing to get to. A minor point I wanted to make, there is a suggestion in here that we're primarily talking about weekday commuter travel, and I wanted to make the sort of soft suggestion that we should also be talking about weekend travel as well, This is just as much a part of the local economy as weekday travel, but it's a different concept, and we see just as much congestion in that process as we do on weekdays. It's just different, and I think it ought to be factored in to the same equation. My question is to Peter Blake, is having got to this point, which to me sets a good direction, what does he envisage is the next step to take it forward? It's a little bit what Councillor Williams was asking. How do we actually engage to make sure we address the delta between bus capacity that is needed in future versus where we are today? And we're talking, I think if I read this correctly, about having a bus network which is 3 times more able to meet the need than it does today.
And before you answer that, I just have Helen at the back there. Oh, no, I also have another. Yes, sorry, yes. Oh, right, oh, everyone's jumping in now. Helen, yeah.
Okay, well, I welcome the report. I think the graphs on page 19 and 20 are alarming. I mean, we have seen them before, but it is kind of stark, the percentage increase in traffic that we're expecting. I guess for me that reinforces that in the longer term, CAM or something like it is the only solution. I can't see us resolving the problem just with bus and cycling changes. In the short term, though, I think, like others have said, we do need to see what changes we can make that will at least to some extent not resolve the problems, but reduce the problems, because as things stand here, things are going to get very much worse before they start to get better.
Thank you. Dr. Wells, yeah.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to very much welcome this report. It is a dangerous sense that there is some strategic thinking emerging from the weeds here. And I think I've made a point on those lines before. So I really welcome it. I think getting the clarity of, which I see as a fresh approach here, is the concept that public transport is in competition with the private car, so let's look at what are the drivers, what makes it competitive. There may be ways of forcing people to use public transport, but if we can work out how we can make people want to use public transport, that's got to be, you know, a preferred solution. So that the idea of journey times, I found the maps on page 22 and 23 both interesting and alarming at the same time. It appears to take about half an hour to get from one side of Trumpington to the biomedical campus, if I'm reading the map correctly, which is absurd, of course. And I think the analysis that it starts to bring, and I accept this as a first step, but the analysis it starts to bring in terms of distinguishing about, are we trying to reduce journey times, or do we need to concentrate on how you get people to the starting point of their public transport journey more effectively? Starting to get clarity on those, I think, is key to getting efficiency of investment, because if we put the money into the wrong thing, which may have been lots of infrastructure, we may end up without delivering results. So I think the clarity of analysis that I see starting here is extremely welcome. Thank you.
And Councillor Massey.
Thank you. I was interested to see in the report on point 8.4 that one of the issues that we need to address is reducing the financial cost of public transport. I just want to reinforce that. Currently, our public transport options are inaffordable for the regular user, and we need to future-proof and make sure that any transport plans that are coming forward are affordable for all users, including people on low incomes. At the moment, for an adult and a child, just to go from Cambridge City to Arbury and back again, it's £7.80, which is basically £10. If you are not working on a low income, that is not affordable, and therefore your only option, and the cheaper option, simply is to get in a car. And we need to change that. And if we can address that, then more people are more likely to use the bus services, because it will be the cheaper option and the better option.
Thank you very much. Oh, yes, Councillor Solomon.
So, like everybody else, I would welcome this report. the one thing that I feel is missing in is a broader context. Actually, it's very good at providing the context of Cambridge and Greater Cambridgeshire. But is there an external context of case studies from other parts of the world, other areas similar to Cambridge that have tried to execute this kind of modal shift? That, just to quantify the scale of the challenge in a global context, maybe we are the only people that are attempting this, but it feels that it's missing what lessons there are to learn from elsewhere. The other thing that I would like to add in terms of in the implication section, the 9.1 first point there, is around, this is going to take a mix, and the challenge is clearly going to be finding what the right mix is. I just wonder what thoughts have gone into different strategic themes, you might call them, in terms of alternatives within that mix of where is the focus. I'd just be interested to hear what Peter's thoughts are on that.
Right then, Councillor Wilson.
The report, can you hear me?
Down.
The scale of the challenge. I've noticed it refers several times to workers and employees, but there's no mention here of sixth form students. In the village where I live, there are we don't have a standard sixth form, and the teenagers from the village all travelling to Hills Road, Long Road, and many of them, as soon as they reach the age of 17, take their driving test and then drive in and park around Long Road. So this needs to be taken into account as well, especially as our bus service has deteriorated in that the bus no longer goes that far and they have to change buses in the centre of town, adding an hour to each end of their day at least when they're studying quite hard for A-levels.
Yes, I was just puzzled because there may not have been a reference to the teenagers, but I'm sure I saw a reference to sixth form colleges somewhere, either in this paper or the one after this one. But yes, it's a point we're very much alive to. But Mr. Blake will address it. Oh, no, well, you've already had one shot, but I'll give you another one very briefly, please. Yes.
Are we restricted?
Yes. Oh, mostly speaking, yes. Well, because I wanted to drive the agenda through.
Well, I think it's an opportune thing because yeah, it's very opportune because it is great to have this emphasis on public transport, buses in particular, and so on and so forth, particularly the cost. But talking about cost, as we know, one of the cheapest ways of getting around is on a bicycle. I was just looking at page 26 here, paragraph 10.2, and I think a kind of subliminal typo here. If you see the last reference there to paragraph 4.4, there might be me not navigating this document incorrectly, but when I go back to 4.4 as I see it on page 18, it's, as I say, it's a reminder of just how central to the lives of people in Cambridge and South Cambridgeshire cycling is, because you'll see there, commuters make up the highest proportion of those travelling, and it says 47.7% of commuters cycle compared to 38.7% of the others. So I think that someone has made a slight error there, but behind it all is they've in the sense of finishing the report by drawing us back to this very important cycling statistic. And yes, we are doing a great amount for cycling, but I think we can do a lot more. I mean, the geography of this area is ideal for cycling, and I think the vision, as we've been told again and again, is to aim to have a cycling network which is similar to that in the Netherlands and Denmark. And in many ways, there's no reason why not. Because you can see from this statistic here that people are already cycling in great numbers, and I guarantee you more and more will take to cycling. When cycling is made safer and there's more comprehensive network of segregated cycle routes and safer junctions.
As the County Council cycling champion, Councillor Gallagher, we would absolutely expect you to highlight the value of cycling, and of course as a passionate cyclist myself, I completely endorse everything you say. And yes, isn't it fantastic that 47.7% of commuters go by bicycle and 38.7% of all travellers into and out of Cambridge go by bicycle, and roll on the tipping point when both of those figures are over 50%. On the 4.4, I think the problem has been identified. It should have been a reference to paragraph 3.4, where you have the whole list of transport schemes laid out there. Does anyone else want to throw anything into this discussion? No? Okay, Mr. Blake, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to do my level best to respond to the points that have been raised. So in terms of starting with Councillor Williams, there is no single answer here. Emphasise the point at the very end about cycling. That is key. This paper is focusing on the public transport requirements as they go forward. What we try to do in paragraph 3.4 is to say, this is what we're already doing, but we recognise, and I think Helen picked up on the graphs, when you look at the graphs, we're actually going to have to do what we're currently doing and then more. So this is very much, how do we start and paint a picture and come up with a deliverable plan for larger scale interventions in our area. Councillor Price, I think, rightly makes the point that the bus is going to be with us in some form going forward, and so needs to be part of our plans. More people travel in London by bus every day than they do on the tube. So what we want to do is work with partners, combined authority and others to deliver the metro system, but the metro system will not cover all of our area. We need to make sure that the bus is as attractive as possible, and cycling and the other modes are as well. So that's the picture where we're almost sort of trying to paint here. I'll speak to the county separately, Councillor Kamara, about the busway issues that you've raised. Talking about alternatives, I think Councillor Topping rightly raises the issue of mobility as a service, and I can reassure members that my colleague Noah Godfrey is doing work on that under the SMART theme. Again, this will sit alongside, it might not be mass transit and lots of people, but will be an important part of the network going forward. I think interchange, Christopher, should be in there, and we will need to get there, because as much as we might like to just look at our little world in Greater Cambridge, there's an awful lot of people who want to come, as is evidenced by the music and the crowds outside. So we need to make sure that we can best avail that in a way that supports our economy and our communities, rather than has a sort of negative impact. So I would see that very much as being the sort of next steps, which hopefully is a nice segue into sort of Councillor Bick's question around what is the next step. So the idea here is to say, let's recognise some of the facts and figures in terms of the growth. One of the issues I didn't pick up on is actually what this paper tells us is the public transport network needs to change quite markedly, not just in terms of size, but actually at the moment it focuses on the city centre. And if you look at jobs and you look at our communities, actually an awful lot of people don't want to go to the city centre. We will always need that, and we need to protect that, but we need to make sure people can get to the biomedical campus or can get to West Cambridge or these other areas. So what we have to start and do from this is to say, let's begin to design the service that we think we need. That is going to throw up a whole host of issues. It's going to throw up an issue where we've demonstrated through our case studies analysis that we're on fairly solid ground with our proposals, but we're going to say, how can we afford it? This is very much around services, not around building things. Building things will be important because what the evidence is telling us is journey time is important and people don't want to get stuck in queues, but we need to build the services and develop the services people can have confidence in. So we need to pick up on how will we pay for it? Who will operate it? We have a current regulatory framework. The Combined Authority has just kicked off their piece of work around the bus review, which will report by the end of the year, which we will be putting this information into to say, you need to tell us how we can, that your work can support changes that are required in the Greater Cambridge area. So we really need to break this down into saying, we're clearer now in terms of what the journey patterns and services should look like, and we need to start saying these are the business case elements for how we ultimately go about delivering that. I think again, Helen Valentine's point on short and longer term, we've absolutely got to we've got to nail. The clarity, I think John Wells' point around the thinking that has to drive our future interventions, because some of this isn't going to be cheap, and we're going to need to make a sort of demonstrable case for that. I hope I picked everything. Cost and fares will need to be a consideration. The information at the moment is actually it's not the driver for commuters. Okay, that's great. And commuters might drive some of the peak time journeys, i.e. the size and scale of the network, but we need to make sure that we're catering for our sixth form students, our people who are coming in off peak. And there probably needs to be a slightly different both pattern and service offer, including cost, to reflect that. So, as I said at the start, this is work in progress, but what we need to do is to use this to size and shape the key components of our requirements going forward.
Right then, members, I think there was broad agreement on welcoming the paper. Sticking to the public transport requirements title given, setting aside how valuable active modes, walking and cycling are, this paper was focusing on the public transport requirements. And I can't help drawing attention to Mr. Blake's reference to how many people use London buses, and indeed that more people use buses in London than use the tube. Of course, London has a franchised bus system, and it costs between 500 million and 600 million pounds a year to keep that bus service running. Now, if you take the population of Cambridge and South Cambridgeshire as a proportion of the population of Greater London, you come up with a figure of about 1/30th, which suggests, as a first approximation, I think, that we ought to be spending something like £20 million a year on a bus service for Cambridge and South Cambridgeshire. So given the fact that we don't have a franchised system and the difficulties that Councillor Williams outlined of getting there, let's see what sort of appetite there is for generating that sort of revenue to support that level of bus service. I'd better move on, otherwise I'll get into terrible trouble for going down that line. Right then, moving on to item 9. Now then, you won't find item 9 in your agenda, members. That's because the paper on the A428 Camborne to Cambridge scheme has been withdrawn from the agenda. That is as requested by the Mayor's interim transport statement, and that statement was agreed by the Combined Authority at a meeting on the 30th of May, and in deference to that declaration, we have decided to postpone that item until the October meeting. So, moving on to item 10, Milton Road, and we're starting off with quite a lot of public questions. So I'll call them to the table in the following order. Anne Hamill, Nick Flynn won't be here, but he'll get a written answer. Eric de Visser, he isn't here either, but I might read out his question. Then Michael Page, then Barbara Taylor, then Maureen Mays. They will be followed by the chairman of the Milton Road Local Liaison Forum, Councillor Scott. And then we'll hear from the officer, then we'll have our debate, and so on. So, if I could invite Anne Hamill to come to the table, please. And you have 3 minutes, starting when you're comfortable.
Press the button. Is that right?
Yes, please.
Thank you. Today, the Joint Assembly will be considering the preferred option preliminary design for Milton Road, with a view either to approving it or to recommending modifications prior to this design going before the Executive Board on 29th of June. After that, the next stage is to be public consultation in the autumn based on the outcome of the Executive Board's decision. However, two of the key objectives set down in the paper accompanying this agenda item are at 2.1, E, increased bus patronage and new services, and F, maintain or reduce general traffic levels. Focusing on the first point, increased bus patronage and introducing new services will require more bus drivers. Current bus services, especially the park and ride, are regularly affected by the lack of bus drivers, reducing the service available to current bus users. And housing costs in Cambridge are high and likely to be beyond bus drivers' salaries. Focusing on the second point, what hasn't been addressed to date is how congestion will be tackled by either the GCP or by the combined authority led by the Mayor of Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, which has come into existence since City Deal was set up, and has an impact on the GCP's broad proposals. If there is to be a metro system, then Milton Road could be little used by public transport, as the metro would go underground at the Science Park. So my question's in two parts. How can the design plans for Milton Road be finalised if we don't know what measures will be taken to tackle congestion by either the GCP or the combined authority? And where are the drivers for an increased bus service to be found?
Thank you very much. We don't have Mr. Flynn with us, so I'm going to take his question as read, and he will be getting a response as in the usual way. Mr. De Visser is not here, I don't think. He has requested his question to be read out, so I hope you can all hear me. Regarding your plans for Milton Road, please allow me as one of its residents for 32 years to propose some improvements. Living opposite Kendall Way, I cycle to work every day inbound on the Milton Road bus lane. Second point, bi-directional cycling on Milton Road's north side is haphazard and occasionally dangerous. Cyclists in both directions very often go much too fast. Too many people are supposed to travel in safety whilst going in opposite directions. On Milton Road, pedestrians are merely separated by a slightly raised line running along the length of the path. Next point, cycleways in Holland are laid in the direction of traffic. That's why I cross Milton Road to cycle along the bus lane. Please abolish the idea to have a shared space path for pedestrians and cyclists on Milton Road's north side. It is wrong and dangerous. A shared path running parallel to it will only increase disorder. How do cyclists overtake one another? This is already awkward now, and the pavement is often used for it. A shared path will exacerbate matters. And why would one use the latter if an inbound cycle lane will be laid out? Next point, you need more crossings where cyclists of all ages can safely cross Milton Road, especially one near Downham's Lane. The southbound bus lane between Elizabeth Way and Mitcham's Corner is very rarely used and should be abolished. Bus lanes should be much shorter and only laid on the approaches to junctions, say 50 metres. All plans should adhere, as in Holland, to 3 priorities. Pedestrians first, cycling second, public transport third. A shared path puts pedestrians in danger. It is likely that bus lanes could become redundant if a metro system is built running from the Science Park to the city centre. Therefore, must bus lanes still be seen as the favoured panacea to gridlock? Thank you, Mr. De Visser. Next questioner is Michael Page.
Thank you. I would like to invite Assembly members to imagine a vision of Milton Road, an impressive tree-lined gateway into Cambridge with high-quality footpaths and cycle paths, and electric buses gliding along a smooth roadway free of potholes, a pollution-free street built for people to travel via a variety of modes in safety and to enjoy their newly landscaped environment. But are we going to allow this vision to be spoiled by vehicles driving over and ruining the new grass verges and damaging the newly planted trees? So my question is, will Assembly members please recommend to the Executive Board that plans are put in place for a traffic regulation order banning verge parking along the whole length of the road, please? Now, this type of measure is not new. It's been used and enforced successfully elsewhere in North Cambridge, but it takes a long time to get a TRO approved and implemented. So I think it's far better to get it onto the agenda now as a preventative measure rather than waiting until after damage is done. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm sure Mr. Blake will be picking that up when he comes to speak shortly. And the next question is from Barbara Taylor.
My question refers to, is it work? Oh, okay. My question refers to the diagram after page 32, sheet 2. Right. My question is about the crossings on Milton Road, which will be used by a large number of local residents. This crossing was also highlighted in our LLF workshops by the residents. Unless the crossings work for local people who walk and cycle, it will become a road engineered solution in favour of those travelling by car. The stretch between Arbury Road and Ewley Lane is just after Fraser Road on the Milton Road is extremely long, and residents using Downham's Lane, that's a lot of people coming from the Woodhead Drive area. There's also a cut through from Arbury, and of course we've got to, not forgetting all the school children and students, will need to cross there. And of course the pedestrians will need to access the bus stops for the buses that do occasionally stop down Milton Road on both sides of the road. So it's very important we have a crossing there. There are lots of journeys involving crossing the Milton Road. Journeys by cycle will be safer if made with direction of traffic instead of bidirectionally. Given that cyclists will be passing each other on the right hand sides and share space with pedestrians, it will seriously confuse everyone. The City Deal's original remit was for better walking, cycling and bus journeys. Please could you ensure that this crossing at Downham's Lane is put in to enable better cycling and walking? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And finally, we have Maureen Mace.
My question that's written down in your booklet has been shortened, and because it's full of numbers, I don't think it makes much sense. So I would like to explain it. When council added the bus lanes about 25 years ago, they decided to share them with cyclists. These days, there are far more cyclists, and the only buses that venture into the bus lanes are the ones that stop at a bus stop, i.e. the number 9, or those that undertake at junctions. There is also more traffic going to the science and business parks than into the city at peak time in the morning. Recently, cars have been parking in the bus lanes between Gilbert Road and Mitchell's Corner. This is despite double yellow lines, and neither cyclists nor buses can use them. Milton Road residents have asked for better and safer walking first, cycling second, and public transport third. The officers and our councillors have listened, and the plans are very much better, but we still have a dangerous precedent where cyclists and pedestrians have an illogically shared space on the northwest side of the road. Andy Campbell of Stagecoach has said that there does not need to be a long bus lane stretching from Kendall Way to Arbury Road. If all the bus lanes are shortened and priority is given at traffic lights with smart, whatever it is, the remaining space can be used to improve the conflict of pedestrians and cyclists on the northwest side of Milton Road.
The GCP's aim is also to encourage more walking, cycling and to use public transport, whether it is by bus, metro or rail. There doesn't seem to be any evidence that long bus lanes make bus journeys quicker. It's just an assumption, and in fact some cities have taken away their bus lanes. With these plans, cars will have a wonderful time on a clear road, so that there is no incentive for change. So my original question was, and still is, why do we need even longer bus lanes when they are not used now?
Thank you very much. And at this point, I will invite Councillor Scott, the chairman. Yes, there you are. I couldn't see you, see. I thought you were hiding. Right. She is the chairman of the of the Milton Road Local Liaison Forum. Now, Jocelyn, you're a very articulate lady. I really enjoy listening to all your asides and everything. And I know you have no time limit. But if I could ask you to be as succinct as possible, I'd be very grateful. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you. But may I just begin with a very slight
button, please. Button.
Oh, sorry.
The big one in the middle.
Thank you. I just have to begin. You beautifully called me chair, and it removed my opportunity to make a comment that as it's 100 years since some women got the vote, I was going to make the point that I'm not a chairman, but you've already picked the issue up, so thank you.
Yes, I felt the ground open up beneath my feet. I fell into that trap. I'm glad I rescued myself before receiving a lecture from you.
No, never a lecture, never a lecture. May I just begin by saying this, that generally speaking, the Local Liaison Forum for Milton Road is pleased with the plans that are coming forward, and it's really unsurprising that we are, in that I pay tribute to the residents' associations, to the residents themselves, to CamCycle, and to everybody who put so much effort into drawing us back from a precipice that was confronting us originally with the original plans. And I do pay tribute to the officers, particularly Paul Vandenbalk, and to the consultants for all the work that they've done in ensuring that I can sit here and say that generally speaking there is appreciation for what is going forward. But as you will have realised from the questions that have been put, there are still some concerns on the part of the Local Liaison Forum being expressed through what residents are saying. And I'd just like to emphasise very briefly some of those. The issue of crossings arose at the recent Local Liaison Forum, and it's been re-expressed here. The wish for a crossing at Downham's Lane. There was also an issue about the Westbrook Centre and whether there could be a crossing there. We're not advocating those, may I say, but simply saying, could attention be paid, and particularly to those two issues, because as Barbara Taylor and Mr Visser mentioned, attention has to be paid to where the residents actually live and where there will be a need for crossings. The issue of bus lanes is still something that's been raised before and is being raised now in terms of the length, so that in the consultation that will certainly arise. The issue of floating bus stops hasn't been raised here, but I do raise it because the Deputy Chair of the Local Liaison Forum, Councillor Bird, has particularly raised this in the context of persons with a disability and also people who are elderly and the concerns that they do have with these floating bus stops. I just wish that they were called something else too. There's the issue of positioning of the bus stops, and the one at Union Lane has been mentioned. There's the issue of buses stopping, or may I say failing to stop. Mr Campbell was at the last Local Liaison Forum and did make the point that the N bus, as it's called, will be stopping more frequently along there. And although I know that we're on Milton Road, not Histon Road, there has also been a request to Mr Campbell to stop the B bus, which comes along Histon Road and floats all along to Shire Hall, and could there be some attention paid there? I simply raise that here. I know it's Histon Road, not Milton Road, but both projects do work together effectively, and we are dependent on Mr Campbell for paying attention being paid to the residents along both those roads and their needs in terms of coming into and out of the city. There's also been mentioned the issue of vergers and the protection of them that's important, and this too raises the question of residents parking, and there will need to be some good liaison between councillors in the area in terms of addressing this issue of residents parking, because residents parking will no longer exist along Milton Road, and we're hoping to work together with the Greater Cambridge Partnership officers on that. I simply wish to conclude by saying this. Generally, there is appreciation for this plan, number one. Number two, we also see the consultation period as a period that really must be an effective consultation. We do not want a consultation that's a consultation when you pretend that you're having one. It's got to be a genuine consultation so that these issues that I've raised here, that the questioners have raised, and other issues that will be raised in the consultation, we hope they will be taken into account properly. That's number one. And number two is this, that the reason I believe that the Milton Road project has worked in the way it has is because there has been a real recognition of the importance of consultation with residents, with the people who live in the area. And also we've had the advantage of having on our local liaison forum, number one, the residents associations represented. Number two, we've had both city and county councillors working together. Number three, there's been actually very good input from city and county councillors because of the boundary changes, which meant that we brought in the councillor from Castle, because bits now of Milton Road are back in Castle. We've got King's Hedges, we've got Chesterton and Arbury, in terms of county divisions, and we've got all those areas of King's Hedges, East and West Chesterton represented by city councillors, and very importantly we've had Milton District Council represented by a councillor from there who is now a county councillor from that area as well. And that's why I think it's worked very effectively, and I would put in this plea that future local liaison forums pay attention, and the projects pay attention to the way that the Milton Road project has worked, because it has worked in the way that it has because of the readiness of the residents to come forward in the way that they did, and then also the cooperation from the Greater Cambridge Partnership officers, and that's been why we've managed to, I think, bring forward a plan that is something that's workable, and we hope, as I've said, that in the consultation period these other issues that are being raised will be paid attention to. So thank you.
Thank you, that's really heartening to hear all that. I hope other members appreciated what lay behind all those very positive statements. I hope we all share the appreciation of all the people.
I just hope that the people behind me
are
right. Equally.
In case you weren't able to hear what the chair was saying, she was particularly grateful to the involvement of residents in the local liaison forum, and then she also said how good it was that the city and county council representatives for a wide range of areas touching Milton Road had effective participation too. Did I get that right?
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Right then. That was for you, Jocelyn, not for me. Right then. Okay. Right then. Right. So, that it leads me on to inviting Mr. Blake to present the report and address some of those questions.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to say a few words by introduction in terms of the report and pick up on some of the questions that were raised. This, in a sense, follows the last report. This is a short-term, delivering some shorter-term improvements. It is what you'd probably describe as seeking an optimal scheme, because what we're trying to do is balance the various different modes. We are seeking, and I think we do deliver improvements in walking, cycling and public transport. So what we are doing is we are looking to raise this sort of urban environment. We're seeking to prioritise modes other than the private car. I think the paragraphs lay out the sort of key changes, which I don't want to go through in detail around the junctions. I know the particular question around Downham's Lane junction that has been raised today was raised in the liaison forum previously, and we've agreed to take that away and see whether we can put an additional crossing in there, and that technical work continues. I think the important point was raised of the impact on residents' parking in the area. So again, being straightforward and upfront to deliver some of the improvements around walking, cycling and public transport, then residents' parking will have to be removed from the area. That would be part of the consultation going forward. In terms of the suggestion around traffic regulation order, clearly that has merit. And I think if the Joint Assembly were minded, they could well request that is considered as part of the consultation process, so Assembly members may want to reflect on that. And I think finally for me, just to reiterate the issue around the bus lanes, actually the existing bus lane is getting reduced in size to reduce a blockage at one of the junctions. The additional bus lanes are going on the outward bound side to deliver benefits to the public transport users along the corridor. This is designed to improve public transport and bus services as soon as we reasonably can, and that when a metro system comes along, I think as we've said previously, bus services will still be required across our area because of the scale of public transport intervention required. I'll leave it there, Chairman, and I hope I've answered all the questions. Okay, and just before we go to Assembly members, we have Councillor Bates with us, the Executive Board member for Transport. Do you have anything particularly you'd like to add to what's been said so far?
Mr. Chairman, I'd just like to pay thanks to Councillor Scott. I did attend the last meeting and heard a lot of what has been said today at that meeting, and I think Peter Blake has just reflected that as well. I think the one I didn't hear, by the way, and I did write it down, was about their parking on the grass and TPO. But everything else I think was picked up at the last liaison forum.
Thank you very much. Councillor Price.
Thank you, Chair. For the last year as Chair of this Assembly, I withdrew from being part of the Milton Road LLF because I'm a ward councillor there, so it's part of my area, and I felt that the Chair of the Assembly needed to be not part of that body. But I attended and I sort of sat and listened and observed members of the public and everybody that Jocelyn has talked about. They've done an absolutely fantastic job. I remember the very first meeting held to present the original plans for Milton Road, a public meeting, one of the most hostile meetings I think I've ever been in. And it's credit to everybody involved that we've gone from that level of hostility to plans to the position that we now find ourselves at. I wanted to just touch on a couple of things, one of which was as a result of Michael Page's question about a TRO to prevent verge parking. He mentioned that they have been successful elsewhere. They have been successful in King's Hedges. We have 3. He's right, they do take quite a long time for some reason to get implemented, but once implemented, they are incredibly successful. A TRO was applied for this year for Milton Road by Councillor Moschini, King's Hedges ward councillor, but unfortunately that was unsuccessful. I'm minded, having heard what Peter Blake has said, that I think it should be part of the plans and the proposals that go forward for Milton Road, so it can be all be done at the same time. And then when the road is finished and it's, you know, in proper use, there will be no parking on those verges, because it does make a difference. No, I think that probably covers it, because I've mentioned what Jocelyn said, and Maureen Mace, of course, has said pretty much what I said there about how the plans are better now than they were originally conceived, and it has been a very, very good LLF to A, be part of, and then B, to observe, and I'm assuming now I go back to being part of at some point.
Yeah, I think we can take it as a microcosm of how the Greater Cambridge Partnership has transformed itself in recent years. Councillor Bick.
Chair, I am listening to this as a non-participant in the local liaison forum, and I am picking up from the public questioners a recurrent theme about crossing points along the road, and I'm not going to be specific because I'm not able to, but I think there is a concern, twofold really. One, that the absence of sufficient crossing points does have the effect of exaggerating the sort of splicing of the community around the road, and secondly, that it doesn't provide perhaps for enough points at which cyclists can cross and use the directional cycle lanes that are in the design. And I think that we obviously have in Cambridge a lot of dual use, shared use cycling and walking areas, and they can meet a real need, especially where we haven't been able to find the space or the infrastructure to design something differently, and there are many places where those constraints are really difficult to get around. But where we're doing a design like we are with this scheme, it seems a pity that we're designing in dual use cycling, as I think is the case along a large part of the northern side of Milton Road. And as I understand it, part of the reason for that is that it's difficult for cyclists accessing the road to cross in order to go the right way with the right cycle lane. And I've always had the view about this scheme that in strategic terms it's not a game changer in terms of public transport. I think there are some marginal improvements going to be secured. I think we're only going to get onto the game-changing bit with public transport when we talk about demand management and talk about the CAM Metro. But it does seem that this has the most potential to do most for cyclists and pedestrians, and it's just a shame that it doesn't quite appear to be doing it in this respect of crossings and then forcing the shared use need along long stretches. So I wonder, is there a way that this can be addressed before this goes out to consultation? Are there options that officers can still look at with the board to try and address some of these concerns?
We'll invite Mr Blake to pick up that question shortly. Councillor Massey.
So on point 3.14, it says that cyclists using the shared pavement to travel inbound will not have priority and will be required to give way to pedestrians. Well, how will that be managed? So every shared use pathway that I've ever cycled or indeed walked on, it's certainly the cyclists that appear to have the right of way, certainly that's the way it feels.
I've never met an ill-mannered cyclist in my entire life. Awful often, yes, terrible. Right, so Mr Blake, sorry, could you pick up some of those points?
So in terms of, I think I said by, so you switch your mic on. I said by way of introduction that this was an optimal scheme and we were trying to balance a variety of things. if it's the will of the Assembly, we can go and look again. What I would say is, though, emphasising the length of time of the gestation period, the consultation with the liaison firm that's taken place to date. There's an awful lot of work that's got us to this point. We can clearly give more priority to one mode. There's an impact on the other modes, and what we've been trying to do is to best manage that. We will take that away in terms of in advance of the board, but I would emphasise the work that's been done to date, and there will not be a magic solution that we come forward with where everybody will be saying this does exactly what we want because of the space constraints and the movement requirements along that corridor.
And about how cyclists are going to give way to pedestrians, I mean, the image I have in my mind is those pavement signs say respect, you know, and I sometimes wonder how much cyclists pay attention to that request, but are you able to give Councillor Bassey any assurance as to how the giving way to pedestrians is going to be managed?
Assurance is an interesting choice of word. I mean, the reality is that all road users and highway users have a responsibility to respect others. Because if they didn't, the system simply wouldn't work. We'd be having barriers everywhere, which I think was where we got to in the sort of the end of the 80s and 90s, where we barriered things out. We took massive amounts of land take, and actually we created an incredibly ugly urban environment. And what happened and what experience has taught us is that people and cyclists and public transport, there's an interaction across that system, and the vast majority of people are respectful across modes, and we will do what we can to support that. But we would hope that that's what happens in this particular instance.
Yes, speaking personally, I quite like shared space, but I know CamCycle is very much dislikes it and is much keener on segregated cycleways, and there is a very strong argument, I accept, that segregated cycleways encourage less confident users onto their bicycles, so let's not go there right now. Councillor Price raised the suggestion that we should add the traffic regulation order into our what we pass on to the board. Do other members agree with that? Well, shall I ask it the other way around? Does anyone not want the traffic regulation order possibility to be taken up and explored further?
I've got no dare you.
I think your clout has won over, Councillor Price. Well, look, I got the impression that there was general broad agreement with the paper there, and we pass it on to the executive order accordingly. So thank you very much for that session, and particular thanks to residents, those who came to ask questions, and to the chair of the local liaison forum. That was all very much appreciated. Thank you. Right, that takes us on to the city access paper. Don't have any public questions on this one. Yeah, that's great.
Thank you, Chair. In many respects, this relates to the sort of first item we had on public transport. In terms of, if on one hand we're looking at developing the public transport offer that in and of itself is attractive enough to encourage people to get out of their cars and use public transport. The other side, if we had a sort of carrot on one side, the other side may well be more of a stick in terms of what would we need to do to actively discourage, what options do we have, and really what impact would the various options have within the context of Greater Cambridge. And so what this paper just tries to outline, and just to emphasise, this is work in progress because it is not complete. It's not complete in terms of the technical evaluation, and what is critically important taking this forward in any way, shape or form will be the ideas of phasing and sequencing and understanding what the impact would be on communities and businesses as we continue with this conversation. So the graph you've seen before in terms of the impact on the traffic numbers, but essentially what the paper tries to do is to say there are principally a number of forms that form some form of demand constraint, some form of demand management may take. The first form may well be a physical constraint. You close a road, or you close it at certain times of day, or you close it to certain types of vehicles. And again, quite candidly, the paper says we are still working on those options. I think the challenge around road closures and closing parts of the city, for example, would be what really is the impact on traffic and what really is what is displaced. So simply you're moving traffic around, and we need to understand that in greater detail. What the paper's got a little bit more information around some of the options on fiscal constraint. So focusing very much on charging for car parking. If there was an increase in car parking charges on an hourly basis, what would the impact of that be on the prevailing traffic movement and traffic levels around the city? And it gives an indication that may be relatively modest in terms of the impact, albeit the income that may be reinvested in other things. And I think one of the challenges we almost set ourselves on the public transport paper earlier on is we recognise there will be a cost, and I think the chair came up with a sort of highly scientific £20 million that we need to we would want to think about. So that's the starting point in parking charges. If you went to a workplace parking levy, which is a charge for the private car park within a city, it gives an indication of what the impact of that may be. That very much focuses on the work that's being done in Nottingham as the sort of the real example in the UK, and actually that goes to show that there's almost a minimal impact in terms of traffic volumes as a result of that type of charge. But nevertheless, it's one of the options that decision makers may wish to consider. We then look at and undertake some sort of projections in terms of pollution-based charging and intelligent charging. Pollution-based clearly offers additional benefits around air quality and pollution-based benefits there, but it does come with a caveat that as vehicles get cleaner over time, there will be less and less of an impact going forward. So therefore, crossing the air pollution and congestion streams, we would need to think, I think, quite carefully about. And then finally, there's the option around some form of intelligent charging, whereby based on the time of day or the prevailing conditions on the network, there may well be a charge with an associated impact on that. So in a sense, the paper is a thought piece that says there's really more work to do around this. Sequencing and phasing is important, and I think, and finally, equality issues will be particularly important within a Greater Cambridge context, whereby an awful lot of people are relying on their motor vehicle to come into the city, and you need to balance that with the impacts and the alternatives that they've got. So I'll probably pause there, Chair, and allow the discussion to take place.
Yes, again, just before we move to the Assembly members, Councillor Bates, nothing. Okay, very interesting. Yes, I'm sure we know what we're talking about. Councillor Williams, over to you then.
Not surprising. First of all, I welcome this paper. It's been a long time getting here. We should have had this much earlier. And I particularly welcome paragraph 6.11, where we do acknowledge that some of the funds that are generated can be used for revenue that we can use to borrow against, and so we can actually start doing things ahead of the actual revenue streams that those things bring about. One thing I would ask though is that a plea for those in South Cambs who don't have or never will have good public transport access direct to the city. You know, many villages there are 106 villages, I think, in South Cam. Not all of them are going to have a regular 10-minute bus service to the centre of the city or to their place of work. So it's really important that we have park and rides, because I think park and rides will provide a good way of those people being able to use their cars to the outskirts of the city and then pick up a frequent bus to either into city centre or their place of work, and that those park and rides have to be free. So I do hope that there is a commitment that the park and rides will continue to be free and we will have more of them. Thank you.
Councillor Price.
Thank you, Chair. Go back to that. We can always say that things should have been here earlier, etc., etc. But I think we just have to deal with. We are where we are, and let's go with what we've got rather than what we wish we'd had 6 months, 12 months ago. And you're right. I'm not disagreeing with you with the rest of what you said. And it's that chicken and egg, and it's about the public transport. I was, probably still am, one of those that was wholly opposed to the original proposals for congestion charging, purely on the basis of the numbers of people that work in Cambridge, cannot possibly afford to live in Cambridge and have been effectively forced to move out. They have no decent public transport system that will get them into work. Therefore, they use their cars if they're far enough. If they're close enough, they will probably cycle, but in the main, it will be the use of cars. And I long felt that all we were going to be doing then was penalising people for coming into the city to work, most likely, although not exclusively, on relatively or actual low incomes. So I've always thought that, you know, that was an absolute no, which is why I'm quite pleased with this report. It's looking at it in less of a sort of that blanket way, that there are different methods, and it will be less punitive on the sort of people that I've described, but unless and until there is a decent sort of linked public transport system, we ain't getting people out of their cars. And it's, you know, I still find it hard that we somehow charge them and punish them for it. But.
Indeed. Councillor Vick.
Well, I was going to make the same comment as Councillor Williams about the progress, because it's the same as the first report on our agenda, really. We've asked to comment on the progress, and I think it is a pity we haven't picked this up earlier, but I'm very pleased that we are now doing so. I think saying that it's good that we're talking about it, I think we should talk about what actually is in here, rather than just talking about it as a big whole. I think that I have two sort of points of view that I would like to sort of enter into that debate. One is that I have a reservation about trying to reduce overall traffic with a pollution tax. The powers that exist for us to even contemplate a pollution tax are not there to reduce overall traffic. They're there to incentivise the substitution of clean vehicles for dirty vehicles. And obviously that's a very important objective for us to have. But it'll only make a significant impact if that includes cars, if it only makes a significant on congestion, if that does include cars. And it's that approach that I think there is a very important dimension that we must consider on the grounds of social equity and fairness. And that is that what it effectively does applied to private car transport, it benefits the people who can afford to go and replace their cars with new models, and disadvantages those people who are driving older vehicles and can't. And I think that is a very, very substantial hurdle to cross in contemplating applying pollution tax to private vehicles. I do think it would be a good idea to consider using the powers for pollution taxes if they were targeted to commercial vehicles and buses, which are two classes and the ones that are most commonly talked about with this power, because you are there talking about organisations that are businesses, and they are sometimes quite big businesses, and they frequently have choices about the vehicles they deploy in particular places within their fleets, and they also have a much more regular approach to vehicle replacement than perhaps any private individual doesn't. And so I think that's an important angle in this whole discussion. The other point that I'd like to enter into debate is a reservation. It depends what we mean about the suggested idea of a phased builder of this sort of policy line. I mean, I awfully don't want this to be like kicking the can down the road, and just because all that we're talking about here is quite tough decisions, and what I think we really need to sanity check ourselves every step of the way, because I think this is at the heart of what our strategy really has to be about, is that we aren't just fending off decisions because they're difficult to take and hope that our successors are the ones to do so. I think that there is a practical problem, that if you take the idea of intelligent charging, as an approach in itself, it is actually a complete solution to most of the objectives we're talking about here. And if that is the one that is left to the end, it would then be in the position of sitting on top of earlier measures in a way which would seem to many as if it was creating a sort of double or a triple penalty for people who may be parking as well and driving a dirty vehicle as well, and then learn that there's another charge to pay on top of that. And it's three aspects of the same behaviour. And I'm just wondering that if that's the intended accumulation of measures, whether it's actually going to be a self-defeating accumulation of measures, because it's going to be seen to be extremely unfair, given that the intelligent charging could be a complete solution in place of the others. So I really would like some assurance that if we do consider this progressive approach, that we consider the whole trajectory right up front, so that we know what we intend to do, and it is quite transparent what we intend to do at different points of the trajectory, and that we've mapped it out before we start, so that and we do it in a way which doesn't defeat ourselves halfway along the line by contradicting ourselves or triple punishing people, because punishment at the end of the day is not what this is about. It's about behaviour change and the delivery of something better.
I'll come to you in a minute, but first of all I have Councillor Topping.
Thank you, Chair. So one of the things that people have talked about in recent years is the inequalities that exist in and around Cambridge as a city. And one of the things that I would not like to see is the proposal described as intelligent charging exacerbate that inequality. And my concern would be that those proposals would inflict most cost on those people who cannot afford to live in Cambridge, but whose work compels them to travel into Cambridge. But we will see how this goes. But one of the things that I would like us to be pretty clear on is that Cambridge, Greater Cambridge, has huge ambitions, and that is rightly so, given the intellectual drive and energy of this place. But we have to recognise that Cambridge has about 110,000 people. South Cambridgeshire, I think, about 130. And it is questionable whether intelligent charging, congestion charging, can be made to pay on those sorts of numbers when you compare them with major metropolitan conurbations, obviously like London. On pollution charging, I think that if you are trying to compel people to do something, which I recognise the point about behavioural change, pollution charging has a resonance that people will, I think, buy into. So I recognise that it's not a complete solution and it has its own issues, but pollution charging might be the way to convince people that something has to be done, and so I would particularly support that. On park and rides, well, jury's out. I would question if we're not charging for park and rides, and I'm very pleased we're not charging for park and rides, but it does cut off an income stream. So I don't have an answer to that. I'm just throwing that into the mix. Thank you.
Right then. Go Sainsbury.
Thank you. I have 2 points to make. Time short. 2 points to make on this. There is a statement 6.18 and 19 talking about physical demand interventions. My view on that would be that we should caution against doing too much work on that. Firstly, because it is likely to change traffic distribution, likely perhaps to skew the analysis that you're doing for the public transport, and secondly, that there could be a board of work that therefore needs to be rectified in the future. So whilst I understand that the costing and the charging side of it is perhaps difficult from an equality perspective, in the longer term that might be the better solution. The other point that I would make, both with this and agenda item 8, really picking up on Helen's point previously, is a clear programme about short, medium and long-term studies and therefore implementation would be welcomed in terms of seeing this really actually progressing and understanding what timescales would be, and therefore seeing some potential impact relatively early.
Thank you very much. Helen, yes, no.
I've got two disconnected points. The first one is around section 8, which talks about equality and fairness. And I think, but this is genuinely a question, implies that there has been some work done that we haven't seen yet. And I guess my question would be, could we see that early work? Because it could be that the early work on equality and fairness suggests that some things are just not going to be possible, and it'd be better to see that sooner rather than later. My second point is around the section on intelligent charging, and this question of whether we have an inner and an outer zone and charge only for one or the other. And it seems to me that the sort of intelligent approach to intelligent charging would probably be thinking about where are the biggest changes and biggest problems likely to arise. They seem to me to be in the outer part of Cambridge, particularly around the biomedical campus. So it's not obvious to me why an intelligent charge that just concentrated on the very centre of the city would make very much difference. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Massey? Yeah.
What I haven't seen in this report yet is any discussion about school traffic, which I know accounts for about 15% during school time of potential traffic during peak hours. Now, one option in order to address this would be to ask the private schools to put into their contract that you are not allowed to pick up or drop off from that school, and instead you ask the question, which park and ride would you like to collect your children from, and we will bus that child to and from. And they could charge that and be able to cover their costs that way, at least go somewhat towards it. In addition to that, to put no pick up and drop off zone around each school would benefit all the schools across Cambridge and make children safer, but also reduce the traffic during those school terms by 15%, which is one of the targets.
Right then, potentially quite controversial there.
Nothing wrong with that.
Right then, no. Okay, well I'll just say one or two things, because two of my refrains have been picked up by other members, so I'll just endorse them. One is that that Cambridge and South Cambridge don't really have the critical mass to make a congestion charge scheme work, so over to officers to address that. And then the lack of a universally accessible public transport network and the whole chicken and egg thing, which just touches on the point that Councillor Williams repeatedly makes, that if one were to have confidence in an income stream arising from one of these suggestions, then one could borrow and already start some of the public transport improvements that might sweeten this pill. And I'd also like to draw attention to the minutes of our previous meeting, because I thought there were two points that I thought were particularly well made. One was that Councillor Cuffley referred to the position adopted by the previous South Cambridgeshire District Council, recording its opposition in principle to a congestion charging scheme because of the relatively unfair effect on residents of South Cambridgeshire. And that led Andy Williams to ask officers if we could come up with any way of allowing council members to negotiate their way through this obviously very difficult impasse. And then Councillor Chamberlain referred to the FIA study, the Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile, sorry about my pronunciation, on demand management, and he highlighted a number of relevant points which that very recently published study had made, which were to explore all other options for improving mobility before considering road charging, understand the rationale and scope of a charging scheme, estimate the impact on a range of scenarios including congestion, accidents, energy consumption, carbon footprint, air quality and modal split, target options for income redistribution and to make maximum use of technology available, and to undertake a market-oriented rather than politically driven approach to designing the scheme. And that was the result of an international piece of work reviewing all the schemes that had been implemented up to then, or at least attempted to be implemented, because some of them hadn't worked. And I thought that paper gave some very good pointers. So, Mr. Blake.
Thank you, Chair. I read the document as well. I thought it was an awful lot of sense in there. So, just picking up on the points that have been raised. Park and ride, I think it's the same answer I gave to sort of Christopher earlier on, in terms of that's part of the sort of public transport mix. We just need to flesh that out. I think the issue around charging of park and ride needs to form part of the wider conversation around what would you charge for and what would people get as a result. And so it is very much looking at any form of charging in the context of link to public transport or other improvements. Current legislation for any form of congestion charging, for example, requires the money to be spent on local transport interventions. In any case, Councillor Price again, public transport system, and I think probably what's not maybe come out in the report here is to say there has to be an alternative in place before you can do this. And that isn't just good housekeeping, this isn't going to work. All the evidence we've got today, this is not going to work if there's not something people can go to. Now that might be increased and enhanced over time, particularly because if you can imagine just doubling the size of the bus network in the prevailing traffic conditions, you're sensing the challenge with that. So there may well be a development over time, but there has to be a real alternative for anything of this nature to come forward. In part links with the idea of a sequencing or a programme of interventions. It is about saying, I think, signalling this is what a programme would look like going forward. This is both in terms of, I think, of Joe Sainsbury's point of this is what studies we will need to do, because this is not something that you want to undertake in a dark room. Members need to be cognizant that this is happening, and these are the sort of this is the outputs of both of the studies, but also this is what any delivery programme might look like. Just sat in my seat, to do some of this stuff will take 3 years if we agree today. So there's just a delivery element, let alone how are we also doing the public transport and what's that interrelationship in terms of sequencing and phasing. And that will require an awful lot of consideration by decision makers as to what that looks like. In terms of Councillor Topping's point, and again reiterating I think about the chair, size and scale, needs to be appropriate to the area that you're considering, both in terms of the geography. Is it a tighter city cordon? Is it a wider Greater Cambridge? What are the charging rates? What are the level of exemption? You know, you can predict the impact on traffic rates and the impact on income and the impact on movement to public transport. What we need to do is reflect that to a Greater Cambridge context. In a nutshell, in London, it was £400 million investment in bus services for what broadly equated at the start to about £400 million of income from a congestion charge. What we would need to do is to understand what the impact would be and actually what would that deliver. Because if the 20 million is right and that delivers the system that you want, then that needs to be part of the sort of charging element to say, well, do we get near it or don't we? And that's what decision makers will rightly want me and officers to bring to them. Park and Rankin Stream. I think Helen's point absolutely well made in terms of the level of impact. It's picking the geography. I think that does relate to an equity issue in terms of almost people who are driving in and imposing their traffic on others, making sure you get that balance right. And that's something, again, that we would want to think about and explore. But equally, you can pick a very tight cordon of 3 streets that has minimal impact and raises nothing, so therefore why are you doing it? And I don't say that in jest, there have been other areas that have looked at that. I think the issue of school traffic and transport, I think the Chair mentioned it was that's the element of the challenging element of it. I think from a practitioner's point of view, it's about deliverability and what benefit would it raise. And so it's being sure that if we had any solution on that basis, it is self-enforceable or enforceable on minimal efforts, because all enforcement has a cost if you're not careful, and that it would genuinely deliver the behaviour change that we want, because otherwise we're simply overcomplicating potentially by picking on one group rather than a wider group. But you're right, we need to explore this from several angles. Critical mass, I hope I picked up on, Chair. I think the chicken and egg very much is saying, you know, if we clearly understand what the public transport network is, and we understand what that would cost, you could start spending money now on, as long as we're clear that there's an income stream that will come along. Not might come along, will come along. That may well deliver to link in with a delivery time frame, where I say I need 3 years anyway, and so you know, you can see how you could form a programme whereby people could understand that. A key element of delivering anything like this is the level of understanding. And this goes far beyond consultation. This is really getting down into individual scenarios, persona workings, so that people really understand the impact on them. And that takes a deal of time and shouldn't be underestimated. So this would all form part of a wider plan, should decision makers decide to take this forward.
Right, members, I know we're all treading on eggshells on this one, but the big conversation told us that much better public transport would be a very, very significant factor in encouraging modal shift. And we're aware that much better public transport would require us to make the roads, road space available for the buses to run more smoothly. And so somehow we're going to have to square that circle. And my impression is that feelings around the table are in general that this work should proceed, and if it's going to take you 3 years, then we would like you to get cracking. I think that's the message. Is that right, members? Yeah. Speaking. Thank you very much. Okay, so thank you very much for that discussion. That was entertaining and edifying. Right, that takes us to greenways. So we have 2 questions on this item. We have Wendy Blythe and Rod Cantrell. And I'll invite... after them, we also have the chair of the... no, that's for the next item. I'm jumping ahead of myself. It's because I'm looking at the front row there, right? If we could have Wendy Blythe up to speak here.
warm welcome to all new Assembly members. Regarding the Greenways proposals, please can you confirm that there will be no removal of historic cobbles or other historic fabric or bridge or path winding or removal of lights or railings in the historic core, and that any signage or bridge or path winding for these proposals will be subject to consultation and planning approval. FECRA members have noted that there are proposals for new greenways over sensitive areas such as Grantchester, and our city commons such as Sheep Green and Cofen are also part of the historic fabric of our city, referred to by landscape architect Tom Turner at the recent Greenways seminar as like medieval manuscripts, equal to the best art in the Fitzwilliam Museum. So widening paths and bridges would be hugely detrimental to their character. So my question is also, what landscape impact assessment has been done regarding the visual impact on these very sensitive historic landscape areas? Is any landing involved, and is there a budget for that? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And next we have Rod Cantrell.
Thank you, Chair. I'm before the committee before the Assembly this afternoon as a City Ward Councillor in Newnham. Firstly, I welcome the proposals in relation to cycling infrastructure in general. As we've heard this afternoon, it will clearly provide help in terms of a modal shift towards sustainable transport and improve the air pollution in Cambridge. My question, though, specifically relates to the greenways in relation to Barton to the city centre. And during the consultation, quite a number of residents have raised with me specific points in relation to that particular route and what they would like to see. Firstly, they'd like to see quite an important component of the route taking into account junctions. That's the Grange Road and the Barton Road junction, to improve road safety for all road users, but in particular for cyclists and pedestrians as they cross Grange Road coming into the centre of the city. And then also, as important, the Newnham Road, Barton Road junction, which is actually a key junction for cyclists moving from the west to the east, and also for cyclists moving in the other direction as well, going north and south. And the final point in relation to key things they would like to see, it comes back to a point that one of the officers raised. At the moment, the Greenway scheme seems to be a hub and spoke proposition. And actually, many areas of work in the future will not be in the city centre. So actually what I'd certainly like to see is an off-route cycle route going from Barton Road to the West Cambridge site just at the city boundary. At the moment, cyclists have to travel down Barton Road and then transverse along Grange Road in order to get back to the West Cambridge site. And given the fact that that site, the employment will intensify from approximately 4 to 5,000 employees at the moment to 15,000 over the coming years, I think this is something that this particular route should be considering. And also, I'd like to see those radial kind of routes for cyclists introduced as part of the broader Greenways strategy. The final point that I would say is that Barton Road is a key approach into the city. Its context, its streetscape, it's characterised by leafy trees. And one of the key messages that I've had back from residents of Newnham, that any scheme needs to respect that existing streetscape, and in particular, those trees. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Peter, did you want to do anything by way of introduction to this, or did I go straight to Mike?
I was going to leave it to Mike to introduce.
Right then.
Thank you. Questions.
Right then, well, I'm sure Mike is well known to you, Mike Davis, as the County Council's Principal Cycling Officer, so over to you, Mike.
Thank you, Chair. I don't know if the microphone's working. So I'll just cover the item and answer the questions in that as well. So some money's been allocated over a 2-year period to develop the 12 Greenway routes. And as part of that process, we've adopted a bottom-up approach, engaging with local communities to maximise buy-in and look at local opportunities. We've staged about 25 events to sort of gather information to inform the routes for public consultation. The first routes that we'll be taking into consultation are Barton and Haslingfield, and that starts in a couple of weeks' time, and we'll then be moving on to Waterbeach and Fulbourn. Just looking at the questions, for when the detailed proposals will be brought forward as part of public consultation, there are no proposals to remove cobbles or historic features. The proposals have been developed working with Cambridge-based landscape architects Fifth Studio, who have considered the environment very carefully. In terms of Councillor Cantrill, the Gough Way to West Cambridge link isn't currently included in Barton or Haslingfield Greenways. It could be included certainly as an option in the competent Greenway consultation, subject to further investigation about land ownership, etc. Grange Road, Barton Road, this proposal is included in the upcoming Barton Greenway consultation for improvement. And also the Newnham Road, Barton Road is included in the Haslingfield proposals. And just to reassure, we have committed to no removal of birch trees on Barton Road. The other part of the report relates to the Quick Wins programme. This has been developed in response to those events that we've held and some of the suggestions coming forward. Appendix 5 outlines the programme, and subject to approval by the Executive Board, we feel this is something that we could start later this summer. Thank you, Chair.
Well, I think that's great. Councillor Bates, would you like to add anything before we proceed to discuss? No? No? Okay, members. Councillor Cavan, I guess. You are our cycling champion, so we'll start with you.
Thanks for reminding me. Yeah, very much welcome this initiative. I've been to some of the public events, and it's really heartening to have so much positive responses from people about these proposals. One thing I'm very pleased about in particular is the mention of the Tins path and the bridge on the Tins path, which runs from Cherry Hinton into the centre of Cambridge, and that bridge has been a huge danger for cyclists and pedestrians, particularly in the winter, because it freezes up and so on. So it's really good to see that there's mention of a possible new bridge there. And linked to my question is also, it's good to see that the people who responded to the consultation were keen on the Waterbeach route, to see a cycle route going parallel to the railway. But that just alerted me, as well as the bridge, to the involvement of Network Rail. To my understanding, having negotiations with Network Rail can be problematic, to say the least at times. So I was just wondering if you've had any early discussions with Network Rail about using their land and so on, and also about this, what I think is a great initiative to do something about the bridge, the Tins route bridge. Thanks.
Councillor Williams?
Yeah, I certainly back up what Noel has said on
Your microphone.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, sorry. I certainly back up what Noel has said about the bridge, the Tins route bridge. But also, a couple of other things. Picking up on this Network Rail issue, if you go down to the current shared path, which is going to form part of the Greenway to Fulbourn, round the back of Fulbourn Tesco's, it is virtually impossible to negotiate it at the moment because of overhanging bushes and trees and undergrowth, most of which is coming from Network Rail's side of the fence. And it's virtually impossible to get them to do anything about it. And one of the issues which we've raised before on this committee and elsewhere in the county, is that once we have constructed these cycleways, and the A10 is another good example, we don't have any money in the budget to maintain them. And over time, we get the undergrowth creeps over them, the trees creep over them, the bushes grow over them, and there is no money to do anything about it. So please, you know, if with these greenways and the sort of the problems in the name really, greenway, can we please ensure that we have a budget, a revenue budget, to support the maintenance of these greenways? That's one thing. The second thing, I'm very pleased to see that under the Quick Wins programme, we're talking about linking the excellent path that's been built in Fulbourn Road to the Fulbourn Greenway and to Tesco's, and certainly going to be a big improvement. Can we also, though, include a safe crossing of Yarrow Road at the roundabout? It is extremely dangerous for cyclists who use that cycle path to go to Fulbourn and, more importantly, Capital Park, have to negotiate a very dangerous roundabout which has no safety facilities for cyclists whatsoever. So that, I hope, will be included. And also on the other side of the railway, when Yarrow Road becomes Gazelle Way, that we bear in mind that we have Cherry Hinton North going to be built at the other end on the north side of the Greenway, and again we will need a decent cycle link from Cherry Hinton North to the Greenway. So perhaps, you know, when we're looking at the 106 contributions from that they might fund an extension in the opposite direction from the Greenway North to the Cherry Hinton North development.
Right. Thank you very much. Councillor Topping.
Thank you, Chair. So I've got three questions or 3 points. The first of which is the most serious, and then it gets more humorous as we go on. But bear with me. So the first question is are we confident that we will not need to widen, or have we baked into these proposals a confidence about the width of the cycle paths? Because what I wouldn't want us to do is to discover that later on we find we need to have a wider, literally wider cycle path, and that raises issues of budgeting and who owns the land and also some of the issues about environmental impact. So I want it to be reasonably clear that we've done that surveying in good order. Because I do think these have these are a good thing for us to be doing, and I'm particularly pleased that not all these cycleways are driving into Cambridge, because it reflects the point that Edward Lee was making, that if you have sufficiently safe cycleways that connect one village to another, then that in itself will encourage that modal shift that we're looking for. So I welcome that. And finally, I mean, I would hope that at least one of these greenways could be named sort of Francis Burkitt Boulevard or something, because it seems.
Oh dear!
It seems to me
that going so well.
In times past, when the Greater Cambridge Partnership was having some choppy waters, Councillor Burkitt came up with the Greenways proposal as something that everyone could be in favour of, and so in some way we ought to try and pay tribute to that. But that last point was levity.
No, we mustn't take the name of the former chairman of the executive board in vain. He did sterling work, and I hope he's having a very good time wherever he is right now. Councillor Solomon.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of points from me. The Barton and Haslingfield greenways are undergoing proposal. I know there has been an issue around Grantchester not feeling sufficiently involved in the either the pre-engagement or the consultation. And that I'm pleased to hear that that is being dealt with. But just to emphasise that as these consultations are going on, to properly include the villages in between as well as those that they are primarily serving. And I guess the other point echoes Councillor Cantrell in terms of connecting up to the biomedical campus. Clearly in the pre-engagement there wasn't that much appetite for people from Barton to be heading into the biomedical campus, but maybe they weren't thinking along those lines because the pre-engagement was focused on getting into the city centre. I'm sure it's too late now to include it in the Barton Greenway proposal, but it does strike me that Comberton and Barton would be well served by a link down to Trumpington as well to get to the biomedical campus, and maybe that's something that can be considered in future phases of Greenway's consideration. Thanks.
Okay, I'll take Councillor Wilson first and then I'll come to Dr. Wells.
I've got 2 points. You've referred to consultation exercises, and on the map there's a greenway between Cottenham and Oakington. Has any consultation been carried out with the people in Cottenham? I know there have been consultation exercises in Oakington, but I'm not aware of any in Cottenham. My second point is on the St Ives Greenway. My understanding is that parts of that are underwater for about half of the year, and what action will be taken to remedy that?
Provide focus.
Thank you. Dr. Wells, please.
Thanks. Thank you, Chair. So I have a specific point on the quick wins map. So I was having trouble reconciling the quick wins map on page 59 and the broader A3 plan on what I suppose is page 62. Because the quick wins is proposing a link between Comberton and Barton. But such a link does not exist on what I understand to be, if you like, the master plan. So, I mean, in a sense, the obvious question is why are we building a piece of infrastructure that isn't on our final plan as an interim step? Maybe I'm missing a point.
Right then, a little conundrum there for Mr. Davies to think about, whilst Councillor Big.
I was asked by the representative of Cambridge, past, present and future, who hasn't been able to make it today, to pick up this question of the Quick Wins programme. It says in the report, and I think this is kind of a flag to a lot of people who care about the environmental aspects of what we're doing. It says that the schemes require minimal consultation, and that is something that is worrying to some people who are defending particular aspects. And Cambridge PPF are telling me that they don't disagree in principle with this programme, and they're not trying to be obstructive to what's trying to be achieved, but they did want specifically reassurance that paths can't just be widened without some form of planning application, so that there is a process around dealing with fit with the local environment and the local area, not wanting to take time up about particular complaints or issues in this sort of forum, wanting to understand that minimal consultation doesn't just mean you go off and do it, everyone finds out about it afterwards.
Right then, if I could just pick up on Councillor Solomon's, well, one of Councillor Solomon's questions about the direct link from Barton to Cambridge Biomedical Campus, if I understood it correctly. And I may not have been paying complete attention, Mr. Davis, when you replied to Mr. Cantrell's questions. I think you covered the nice rural urges and the junction, but did you touch on the direct link, not having to go onto Grange Road? So if you could maybe pick up on that.
Yeah, the Gough Way link you're talking about. Yeah, I mean, I was just saying that could be included in the Comberton Greenway, which we're currently formulating the options for. Yeah.
So, anyone else want to? Oh, sorry, yes, Andy. Yeah.
So probably going last as everyone has already said everything. But I'm particularly on what Councillor said about the sort of interconnectivity. It very much looks on the map. We said some travel schemes initially. It's all about getting from outside in. I think those shorter term journeys are more interesting. So what would be quite nice to see on all of these is how they connect with what we call hubs. So every train station. So for example on the A10 it goes along Melbourne and there's no mention of Foxton Station. Probably just as well because nowhere to park you buy at Foxton Station at the moment. So perhaps we should start thinking a bit more about those short-term journeys into connectivity. It's fine if you're on a greenway, but if you're half a mile off a greenway, it's a dangerous road, there may well not be a greenway there. So I think if we can make them look like feathers, Mike, do you know what I mean? So that we could get more, see how those shorter journeys might all add up together. And I'm sure some of those maps do exist, but I think if we could move away from that, it's always a super highway going into town. And I would like to just reinforce the maintenance of these cycleways. So AstraZeneca sponsor the vegetation cuts on the A10 cycleway at the moment, so we give it extra cuts because it's particularly important to our staff. Other cuts are now done by local councillor Susan van der Ven and her team of local plucky, I have to say, volunteers. We've actually had to be trained to use special cutting devices and done health and safety checks, which I think is a fantastic example of localism and getting things done, but perhaps doesn't reflect a GCP strategy around greenways. So I'd like to see any schemes we come forward with have some sort of maintenance plan, so it's not just the cost of those schemes, but the cost of maintaining them over an extended period of time.
Right then, well, I can't help mentioning the Cottenham, sustainable Cottenham commitment to keep clearing up the cycleways out of Cottenham, and so the local action does have a part to play in all this sort of stuff. Any other points from members before we ask Mike Davis to respond to as many of those as he feels comfortable with? No? Okay, Mike, over to you.
So regarding the TIMs, we have had initial discussion with Network Rail. We are talking to them on other projects. I wouldn't say it's always a negative experience, but you know, sometimes there are staff changes and things can take a long time. But the bridge on the TIMs is actually owned by Network Rail, so the conversation is going to be along the lines of us paying for a new bridge that they currently maintain. In terms of maintenance, one of the work streams within Greenways is around maintenance. So we recognise from the outset that it is an important thing we need to look at. A couple of ideas for maintenance, one of which is commuted sums. So we negotiate a figure from the capital pot to pass on to maintenance budgets. But we are also certainly trying to encourage any sort of volunteer or ranger type networks. And it's certainly a thought that the routes we build first might be those that actually have some sort of local support network in place. So the sustainable Cottenhams or the Melbourne type models. And of course any sponsorship opportunities or anything like that would be warmly welcomed. Or indeed to sort of campaign for some sort of change of policy within the County Council in terms of maintenance. Cherry Hinton North, the Section 106 negotiations are underway, and there's a lot of talk about cycle routes and crossings and issues such as that, which ones will come out of the development, which might be paid through greenways. So a lot of that is being covered, and as you say, that's one of the really quick wins, because we're hoping we can keep the contractor on Fulbourn Road and sort of carry on around the corner. So it's a good example. But we will look at those crossings that you've mentioned. In terms of path width, I think this is something very much for the actual formal consultation, because I think every part of every greenway will be different. It's easy to say nearer Cambridge they'll be wider, because that's not really the case. Some of the large employment sites and larger villages are actually further out. But certainly the likes of Waterbeach, which is a sort of greenfield type of greenway, we'll be looking for probably a 3.5 metre wide tarmac path with a 2 metre grassy strip alongside it, which is more for horse riders and ramblers, and also that kind of strip gives plenty of scope for landscaping, ecology, public art and that type of thing. So I think Waterbeach is the interesting one at this stage because it is very much a greenfield site. In terms of naming, well, I won't really answer that, but just to say that, you know, as it happens to have worked out, you know, the two of the earlier greenways are Barton and Haslingfield, so perhaps Francis Burkett will be able to use some of those quickly. Grantchester Parish Council, I am aware that they wrote to us and had concerns about one of our earlier proposals to close the road or to trial that. So we did consider that, and we haven't included that in the consultation. My colleague did go with you to meet them the other evening, and I think the channels of communication are there now and much better. And we have listened to their proposal for the other route near the rugby club. There is certainly scope to propose other routes as part of the consultation. There'll be a free text box to make other ideas. And we've said all along that we hope there will also be a greenways too. So some of these other links, some of these circular trips perhaps can be covered by a future phase further on down the line. We didn't actually hold an event in Cottenham. The Cottenham to Oakington, as with the Barton to Compton, is very much a link. So we're saying this is a greenways network, but we are recognising there are links as well. And as Andy suggests, in the end they'll probably look more like sort of fish bones with a main greenway with local links as well, obviously subject to budget and subject to the sorts of ideas we get in the consultation. The busway has been prone to flooding. It did flood very briefly earlier this year, but there were 4 years prior to that with no flooding. But we recognise that's an issue, and to address that is quite complex in terms of the Environment Agency. But certainly that's the sort of thing that will come up in the consultation, and we will consider that. In terms of quick wins and consultation, I mean, with anything we do, there will be some sort of consultation. It may just be a localised letter drop. That will then flush out anyone who's got very strong concerns about, for instance, path widening. But we will be considering, when and if we get the funding, how we do that consultation. But it's striking a balance. There seems to be an appetite to actually get on and deliver some of these projects. And obviously we've got to balance that with an appropriate amount of consultation and looking at those responses. I think I've covered most things.
Right, and you've even persuaded the electrical connection to close correctly. So thank you very much. Yeah, members, were all your questions answered to your satisfaction there? And I picked up a feeling that these greenways are so popular, we want lots more of them, but that's not within our gift right now. Do we give an endorsement to this paper? And yeah,
we do.
Lots of nods around the table. Thank you very much, Mr. Davis. That you're preaching to the converted, maybe. So well done, and good luck with that. Which brings us to item 13 at last. I'm sorry to have kept you all waiting. I'm going to begin with the chairman of the South East Local Liaison Forum, and then we'll go from the officer and take it from there. So, no longer Councillor Orgy, but Tony Orgy, speak to us. Yes, thank you for coming.
Okay, thanks very much. The Local Liaison Forum met on the 6th of June to consider the outcomes of the February to April consultation. Having been informed that decisions on the strategies would be deferred, the meeting focused almost entirely on the common elements, which are called interventions. The forum noted that each of the 17 interventions gathered more support than opposition, and there were no comments at the forum meeting that opposed the principle of any of the interventions. One of the features of the consultation process was, in many cases, the relatively high percentage of no opinion. Some respondents felt it inappropriate to comment on interventions that were some way away from where they lived, whilst other respondents felt that more weight should be given to local responses, as those local to a specific intervention might well have a better and deeper appreciation of the potential ramifications of that local intervention. And that leads naturally on to the concerns that were expressed about the closure of the central reservation at the Dean Road crossroads. And the concern that this would lead to HCVs diverting to unsuitable roads through local villages such as West Wickham and Horsey in order to access the A1307 towards Cambridge. There are similar views about having no right turn except for buses out of Linton High Street, with the back road being considered to be completely unsuitable to deal with increased traffic. The Forum therefore welcomed that the Dean Road Crossroads proposal would be given further consideration, and that the Linton High Street no right turn proposal would be re-evaluated. The Forum wanted further consideration to be given to speed limits along the A1307, and there was much support for a single speed limit outside villages. It was felt that further work would be necessary in relation to safety at the Vagrant crossroads, which were that issue was only mentioned in vague terms in the consultation, and further work in relation to cycleway access to Granter Park. The consultation included cycleways and a greenway that went close to Granter Park, but with gaps of several hundred yards to the actual site entrance. It was stated in the meeting that there will be further work on these issues by consultants, but the Forum was of the view that it was important that local councillors and stakeholders should also be involved in this process. There was a plea for landscaping to be an integral feature of designs and for ecological matters to be given appropriate consideration. There were particularly adverse comments about the Greenway, and focusing particularly on the present section of cycleway between Wandlebury and the roundabout entrance to the Vagrant Research Campus. It was felt that this narrow section of cycleway immediately next to the 1307, where there's a 60-mile-an-hour speed limit, did not meet the principles of a greenway. In conclusion, the Forum was pleased to see progress and that some interventions could be implemented this financial year, particularly the extra cycle racks at the Vagrant Road Park and Ride site, and making the traffic lights outside Linton Village College to be much smarter than they are at present. The Forum would make a strong request that local councils and stakeholders are actively involved in working up the details of the intervention. And finally, a representative from the Trumpeton Residents Association made a statement strongly critical of the delay in making decisions on the strategies in the consultation. But as you heard from your first question at this meeting, there are other views on that matter. So one of the key issues was about this idea of a greenway that is very narrow, with quite a deep curve, close to a very high-speed road, and with a significant hedge on the other side, meaning that cyclists had nowhere to go if there were any problems or issues. And in particular, when cyclists are going on that stretch of cycleway at night, when they're going in the opposite direction to the cars coming immediately close to the cycleway, that they're dazzled by headlights, and it was quite dangerous. So those are really the issues which came out of the Forum meeting. As a broad agreement for all the principles, some concern about some of the details, but real pleasure in the sense that we're actually getting towards doing something.
Right. Thank you very much. That was very helpful. It's really valuable to have that sort of feedback. So thank you very much for putting it together so succinctly.
Could I just say that I'm very sorry, but I'm chairing a meeting at 5:30 in a local village, and I've got to go by bus, and I'm going to get there on time, so I'm going to have to leave fairly quickly. No disrespect to the rest of the meeting.
Okay, and full marks for the sustainable transport option that you've chosen. That gets plenty of brownie points. Okay, so actually, I was going to invite Ian to add anything. He isn't here, so yes, Mr. Blake.
Thank you, Chair. Actually, not a lot to add from the Liaison Forum, Chair. This report was originally envisaged to be a little bit bigger. It was going to include the sort of decisions or proposals around what the future options and future phasing will be. Our hope is after the pause we'll be coming to the next cycle of meetings. So in the short term, it was focusing on those short-term interventions that are listed from paragraph 311 onwards. A number of them can be delivered this year. and so we want to get on with them, and I think the chairman of the forums outlined that there was broad support for that. I think we've agreed to take away a couple of the issues that were raised around the junction, the right turn ban, and look again at the greenways, but otherwise we want to get on site and get some of this done. And then we will come back as soon as we're able with the sort of the wider proposals on the future strategy.
Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of things. First of all, on the maps on page 109 and presumably 110, you show the agri-tech proposed. That actually was refused planning permission. The officers recommended refusal, and the South Cambs Planning Committee accepted that officer's recommendation. So in fact, I wouldn't want us to get into any controversial, so could we amend that and remove it? The other thing I wanted to ask about was the Wandlebury multi-user underpass. Now, looking at the responses to the consultation, that's page 77, A36, it would appear that the response to that was pretty negative, but it doesn't actually, I'm just looking for some explanation in the report about it, and there doesn't seem to be, unless I've missed it, anything about it in the report. So I wonder why, given that response in the consultation, and given the fact that we're looking at £1.5 million, could I have some further details about this, please, as to why it's still there?
Okay. No other members? Right. You sure? Right then, Mr. Blake.
That chair, I will defer to Andrew Munro, who's the project manager, who knows this, knows the answer.
Thank you very much. Mr. Munro.
Thank you. In respect to agri-tech, yes, that was on the original consultation material that was brought forward into these plans, but we will remove it for the next report. In respect to the Wandlebury underpass, overall it was well supported, so there were also comments and fairly strong support of it. Some groups have queried the cost. The challenge that we have there is that we have a high-speed road, it's at the end of a dual carriageway, and with the existing speed limit of 50 miles an hour, the reduced visibility, so we're already proposing to make an improvement to an accident cluster site at that location by moving Haver Hill Road further away from the crest of the hill. The current Department of Transport standards for a road with that volume of traffic and that speed of traffic requires us to either grade separator crossing or to provide signals. The conclusion that we came to was that, as we'd already rejected signals as a solution to the road junction, it was not possible to then implement signals to enable people to cross the road. Consequently, the only option we were left with was the underpass. I recognise the comments that have been made, the representations made regarding the cost, and I am proposing that we will do some value engineering on the proposals there to see whether we can achieve some savings. But at the moment, in terms of safety crossing the road at that location, an underpass is currently the only solution. A bridge would be unacceptable visually, is the conclusion we came to.
Do you want to come back on that, Councillor Williams?
Yes, I mean, just that, elsewhere when we've considered underpasses, we've accepted that they are not very well used for obvious reasons, and prone to flooding as well, and I'm probably, at the end of the day, you'll probably find people not using the underpass but attempting to cross the road. And I just wonder whether we are trying to do something which, at the end of the day, actually won't be used, and we will have a road safety issue because people will try to cross the road at surface level. and why not accept that and try to engineer something for that, which in the long run would probably be cheaper anyway. It's not a cost issue for me, it's that an issue that we know that people are reluctant to use underpasses, and whether or not this is actually going to be used and could in fact cause a more a road safety issue.
Right then, well, Councillor Bates wasn't here to receive that, but I'll make sure that point is passed on to the board for their consideration, because obviously, you know, I think those points are valid, even though there are many who favour that option, and the due consideration has already been given to keeping it in scheme. Anyone else want to go? No? Okay, so well that seems to be fairly good support. So yeah, thanks very much. And that takes us to the GCP quarterly progress report. So we're on the home straight now. We haven't done too badly. Well, can't say that yet. Oh dear, tempting phrase. All right, Neve. Yes, right there, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I hope you can hear me. I'm quite loud, so do say it not. So, for those of you who are new to the Assembly, this is an opportunity for us to talk through progress across the whole programme. So you'll notice if you've had a chance to read, we use a rag rating to set out how we're getting on with some of the key schemes. We go through each work stream. There's also an overview in here of our community engagement over the last year or so. There's also an update on the West of Cambridge package, and there's we're asking the board to continue to support some skills work, which is outlined in here, and we're also asking the board to consider some feasibility work for some affordable housing schemes, one in South Cambs and one in the city, which some of you may be familiar with. So I guess if there are any questions, I'd be happy to take them. Sarah Haywood is here to help us on finance, if there's any questions there, and I'm sure Beth will be happy to take any questions on the comms update.
Right then, who wants to kick off? Councillor Green.
While everyone else is deciding, I wanted to ask about the apprentices, the skills section, and just to note that the table at the bottom of page 344 looks very good in the sense that we paid for a particular intervention with CRC to try and improve the demand for apprenticeships from employers in particular areas, and it looks from this table as though we're achieving the effect that we wanted to achieve, so it seems very good. The factual question that I had was about the top of the following page, the numbers of apprentices. I mean, I'm finding it really difficult to believe that we are talking about numbers from 2014-15 and 2015-16, and we don't have any numbers since then. And why not? Yes, and because there has been a worrying trend nationally, which has caused a drop on a national basis, not even a smaller increase, but a drop, which we're obviously very keen to know how it breaks out in this area. I wonder if if the following paragraph is telling us that you're still analysing the data, maybe you can give us a sneak peek into what you're finding.
Yeah, Councillor Williams.
Well, just on page 343 regarding Campbell High Street, I don't know whether I ought to declare the finance portfolio holder for South Cambs. I'd be very pleased if you agree to this.
I'm sure you weren't supposed to say the second part. We accept your declaration of interest.
I'm not influencing you at all.
No, good. You never dream of doing that. Yeah, that's another fun. Let's strike that for the record, right? Anyone else then? Yes, right. Councillor Price.
Just to an inquiry really about skills and what work is done jointly with the combined authority, because I know that they've got a skills, and I substituted for the leader at one of the meetings and asked why they were trying to reinvent a wheel and not working with, or at least consulting with the Greater Cambridge Partnership, who have sort of probably got 2 or 3 years ahead on them. So I just wondered if there is any cross-working with the combined authority. Not to cause trouble at all.
Yes, Councillor Massey and then Councillor Tolkien.
On the subject of apprentices, apprenticeships rather, well, I'd like to know what the average age of the apprenticeships has been taken up so far. Only because I've been talking to various businesses who say that quite a lot of the applications they get for apprenticeships are actually from the age groups 25 and up, and which means that although we are looking at the senior schools, they're not accepting them, which means maybe, which is why I'm also pleased to see that you have gone into 4 primary schools. So we do need to start looking at primary schools in particular and targeting our children younger, because I think sometimes by the time they get to 15, 16, they've already decided what they want to do or what they don't want to do. And moving on to page 347, smart panels, and it says that it's going to be rolled out, apart from the one that's in Shire Hall. Where will the locations of the other pilot schemes be? Will they be in town or will they be in a building? It would be much better if they were in town for the general public to be able to see them. And also the station gateway, which is on page 346, will that gateway be rolled out to Cambridge North Station?
Thank you. Councillor Tolkien.
Thank you, Chair. So, staying on that page 347, the autonomous vehicles, and I appreciate you may not have. Can we have a confidence that this is going to move at the pace that's being predicted here? And I say this because Oxford are running an autonomous vehicle pilot, I think to DIDCOM, and I would not want us to come second to the others.
That's great competition, yes. Thank you very much for flagging that up, Councillor Tolkien. Dr. Wells?
So I had a question on, at the risk of troubling my neighbour here, page 409 and 409, 10, 11. So there were 3 items, so it's a question of principle, not of detail. But there, as I read it, there are 2 proposals there asking the partnership to fund £50,000 feasibility sort of preliminary studies, one related to Campbell, one related to the stadium. It seems to me that there is a risk of the partnership simply becoming a good place to go and get a £50,000 contribution to any project. I'm not making a derogatory comment about these requests, but there is clearly a risk that we are seen as a place to go to get some money to top up or to add to some project. And I think it would be, they may exist, but it's not clear to me. So what are the principles about whether we should fund these kinds of things or not? Because this could be the beginning, this what could be one of an endless stream of apparently worthy requests for funding of this sort. And if it's appropriate, then I've no problem doing it. But are we crossing a line?
Thank you. Andy?
So hesitating to take on the role of an officer, but I visited the autonomous vehicles in Berlin last Friday. And they do indeed exist, which is always a good starting point. We went on one round a tour, and it went into lots of stops. Somebody deliberately walked in front of it and it stopped, which is another good.
They were very
So the basic requirements of a TIC I think have been met. So I personally, not as an officer, would say that I think our scheme has a good chance. It's going to be a good setting, so it's off-road on the guided busway. One of the things we need to think about is the speed that it will be able to go. So in this fairly built-up environment that we were in, the maximum speed was about 7 or 8 miles an hour. which is jogging pace. I think if we want to go use them on our more slightly further distances, we manage to speed them up. But I had some confidence following that visit that at least we were on the right path.
Right, that's very helpful. Thank you very much. And Councillor Dick, you have.
Sorry, I ought to group this otherwise. I didn't know how you were doing it.
No,
but
that's great.
the question was about the communications section. And at the bottom of page 354, there's a reference to, right at the bottom, a reference to community sounding groups. This has been subject to some controversy outside the sort of the governance structures of the GCP. I think partly because people just found out about it and weren't quite sure where that fitted in and what purpose it needed. I'm personally an agnostic on this. I can see a point in improving the quality of input that officers get, but I wonder if this is an opportunity for you briefly just to say a few words about what this is and what it adds to the process.
Okay, yes, I didn't take section by section because you all look like rabbits in headlights to start with, members, so I gave you free rein, but officers will sort it all out for us and present in a cogent order.
Thank you, Chair. So if I take the first few points and then Beth might want to add something on comms at the end. Councillor Vick, on your question on apprenticeships, the information was has indeed been available for some time, but was slow coming. I understand that government were a little slow publishing it. My understanding is that that was likely due to that the trend wasn't a good one. The trend I understand, but we don't have the finalised figures yet. We will have them for you next time. Is that the trend nationally has been going down significantly, and it may have also gone down in this area, but not nearly as much as it has in the other parts of the country. So we may see a decline, but one that isn't as bad. I think we're likely to summarise next time. And the work we're doing to continue work on skills, the next phase is to try and make sure the trend goes in the opposite direction next year. And Councillor Price, on your question of collaboration with the Combined Authority, so particularly on the new work that we're looking into at the moment, we are absolutely at officer level sharing that work and asking for their comment. So that is very much in collaboration. So the GCP has a target of 420 additional apprenticeships, as you know. So this next phase of work is to do what government asked us and get that right. The average age of apprentices so far, I don't know, and we'll find out for you and let you know. I think that, again, the next phase of work is about going to more primary schools. What experts are telling us is, as you said, that's exactly the right place to start influencing folk early. So there'll be a focus on that in the next round of work. Smart panels and on the gateway, again, I'll get back to you. I don't have that information. Councillor topic on autonomous vehicles. My understanding is that it's on track. Not literally, but not a heavy truck, and I don't know about beating other cities. We just have to stay on track, I think. On Dr. Wells, on your point about should we, shouldn't we? So the principle, the first thing that officers look at is, does this scheme offer additionality? Would this scheme have happened anyway? If it would, we really ought not to be intervening. I think that's the kind of headline principle. We do get many requests for funding, and often they fall at the first hurdle because indeed we determine that they can be delivered without our intervention. So I would say that that's the first principle. I don't know if anyone else would like to comment on that.
So are we saying then that the potential for the redevelopment of the Abbey Stadium scheme wouldn't happen without the Greater Cambridge Partnership?
So I think that's what this work is about understanding. So the idea of doing a very, very early initial feasibility study is to understand exactly that.
Thank you.
Very helpful addition there, Councillor Price.
Yeah, Beth, do you? Okay. So yeah, Councillor Vick, on your question on the community sounding group. There's a broader communications engagement update from page 353, which outlines the work that's been taken over the past 12 months generally to broaden and strengthen our community engagement with a number of different channels. The concept of a community sounding group, really a focus group of a small number of people from within the community across Cambridge and South Cambridgeshire, is really to augment the channels that we already have. It really came about because we were finding that there were lots of separate meetings with lots of different groups at their request. Resource intensive, but that's not the point. Those groups weren't coming together to hear each other's voices in a room, in a round table setting, to have a constructive conversation about how we could take some things forward. So that was the rationale for establishing it. There was a planned publication, and our hand was forced on that rather, and we published after people had found out about it, which was unfortunate and not planned. The membership has grown initially organically, but this is a trial. It's very much in its formative stages, and we're listening to feedback, and we will reflect on the feedback and reaction that we've had from some people on this, including some city members.
Thank you very much. Councillor Solomon has another point.
Yes, so just interested to read the communications and engagement update. There's clearly some good learnings on the local liaison forum review. Just on the Camborne to Cambridge, I know, Peter, you've made a sort of commitment to work up an optimal on-road solution involving the community. So this suggests that there are different ways in which that engagement could take place now. Will it be with the local liaison forum, or will it take a different form, and when will that take place, given the pause that there now is on that project?
When we're unpaused, we're going to go back to the liaison forum.
Okay.
Yeah. So the reason we haven't had one is because the partnership, the members of the partnership agreed, albeit reluctantly, to accept the pause, and frankly it would just have been disingenuous to just go along to the liaison forum when you take away the bigger decisions, which wouldn't have been taken forward. There was nothing else to discuss. So that was the reason.
It was just to check that it will be back to the liaison forum rather than a different form.
Liaison forum.
Okay, thank you.
Right then, that completes the discussion of the quarterly progress report. That's great. All I have to do now is to thank you all for coming, and to remind you that the next meeting is 2 p.m. on Thursday the 20th of September. And before I close, I'm just going to flag up the London Stansted Cambridge Consortium Annual Conference on the 27th of June at the British Library, because our own Andy Williams is on one of the panels. So you're allowed. And with that, I'll close the meeting.
And you know, so we don't have to, is that right?